the complete story of Greek mythology. Good evening and welcome to Think While You Wink. Tonight we're embarking on an extraordinary journey through the entire story of Greek mythology, from the birth of the cosmos to the adventures of legendary heroes. In the comments below, let me know which country you are listening from. Without further ado, let's begin. In the beginning, chaos and the primordial gods. Before there was light, before there was darkness, before there was anything at all, there was chaos. And chaos was not what we think of today when we speak that word. It was not disorder or confusion or tumult. Chaos was something older, something beyond language, beyond thought. It was the yawning void, the gaping emptiness that existed before existence itself had meaning. Chaos was neither good nor evil, neither warm nor cold. It simply was, a vast nothingness stretching in all directions that had no directions, lasting for a time when time had not yet been born. From that ancient void, from that pregnant emptiness, came the first stirrings of being. The earliest accounts tell us that Gaia emerged from chaos, the earth herself, solid and vast and unshaking. She was not merely ground or soil or stone. Gaia was the living embodiment of all land, the great mother from whose body all terrestrial life would eventually spring. Her form was the earth itself, her breath the wind that moved across plains and valleys, her blood the rivers that carved through mountains and fed the seas. Close behind Gaia came Tartarus, a being of darkness and depth, the abyss that lay far beneath the earth's surface. Tartarus was both a deity and a place, a vast chasm so deep that it would take an anvil 9 days to fall from earth to its bottommost depths. This primordial being represented not evil, but the deep places, the hidden chambers, the spaces where light had never touched and never would. And there was Eros, though not the cherubic child with bow and arrows that later ages would imagine. This primordial Eros was the force of attraction itself, the binding power that would draw all things together, the cosmic principle of love and desire that would make creation possible. Without Eros, all things would have remained separate, distant, unable to join and create new forms. This Eros was pure potential, the promise of connection in a universe just beginning to understand what connection meant. From chaos also emerged Erebus, the deep darkness, the shadows that would cloak the world in the hours between dusk and dawn, and his sister counterpart Nyx, the night herself, clothed in robes so dark they made even chaos recoil. Nyx was ancient and powerful beyond measure, a figure so formidable that even Zeus, in his later reign, would hesitate to cross her. She moved through the early cosmos, trailing darkness like a cloak, and where she passed, the brightness of day would flee. Erebus and Nyx, darkness and night, came together in the void, and from their union sprang Aether, the bright upper air that the gods would one day breathe, the pure light that exists above the clouds where mortal eyes cannot reach. And they bore Hemera, the day, who from the moment of her birth was fated to chase her mother across the sky for all eternity. Each morning Hemera would emerge with her light, pushing Nyx back into the far reaches of the world. Each evening Nyx would return, spreading her dark veil across the heavens once more. This was the first cycle, the first rhythm, the heartbeat of the cosmos that would mark time for all the ages to come. Gaia, alone and vast, looked out across the emptiness and knew she could not remain solitary. From her own substance, without need of consort or companion, she brought forth Uranus, the starry sky. Uranus stretched above her, arching from horizon to horizon, his body studded with countless lights that would one day be called constellations. He was both her son and her equal, and when he descended to embrace her, covering the earth with his vastness, their union shaped the world as we would come to know it. Sky met earth, and in that meeting, the first boundaries of the cosmos were drawn. Gaia also birthed the mountains, raising them up from her body like bones beneath skin, each peak a living being, a primordial god unto itself. The Aurea, as these mountain gods were called, stood eternal and unchanging, their peaks crowned with snow, their slopes thick with forest that had not yet known human feet. And from herself Gaia brought forth Pontus, the ancient sea, who surged with a will and consciousness all his own. These waters predated ships and sailors, predated even fish and whales. existing as pure liquid chaos that Gaia had given form and purpose. Now came the time of the first great generation. Gaia and Uranus joined together, and from their union came the Titans, 12 beings of immense power and presence, children who would rule the cosmos before Zeus and his siblings ever drew breath. 6 sons and 6 daughters, each vast in their own right, each carrying within them aspects of the world that would need governing. The male Titans were Oceanus, the great river that encircled the world, flowing in an endless stream around the disk of the earth. Coeus, the Titan of intellect and the axis of heaven around which the constellations revolved. Creus, lord of the constellations and the measure of the year, who ordered the seasons and marked the passing of time by the stars. Hyperion, the walker on high, the Titan of light from whom the sun and moon would descend. Iapetus, the piercer, the Titan of mortality, who would father the ancestors of humankind. And Cronus, youngest of all, most cunning and most patient, whose name meant time, and who would indeed bring the age of his father to an end. The female Titans, the Titanides, were equally powerful. Theia, shining and radiant, goddess of sight in the clear sky, would become mother to the sun, moon, and dawn. Rhea, the flowing one, embodiment of ease and comfort, would one day become the great mother of the Olympian gods. Themis, divine law personified, who would sit in council even after the Titans fell and become an advisor to Zeus himself, for justice transcends the passing of ages. Mnemosyne, memory incarnate, who held within herself all things that had ever been, keeper of knowledge and mother of the muses who would inspire mortal poets and artists. Phoebe, the bright one, titaness of prophetic radiance, grandmother of Apollo and Artemis, the far-shooting twins. And Tethys, the nurse, titaness of the nourishing waters, who with Oceanus would bring forth all the rivers and streams that watered the earth. These 12 Uranides, as they were called, children of Uranus and Gaia, stood as the first ruling generation of gods. They were vast, elemental, more forces of nature than beings with personalities as we would understand them. When Oceanus moved, the seas responded. When Hyperion walked, light followed in his path. When Mnemosyne spoke, her words became memory, impossible to forget or alter. But Gaia's fertility did not end with the Titans. Her womb carried other children, beings of different nature and aspect. She bore the Cyclopes, 3 brothers, each possessing a single eye in the center of their broad foreheads. Brontes, the thunderer, Steropes, the lightning maker, and Argus, the bright one, were giants of incredible strength and skill. Later ages would know them as the master smiths who forged lightning bolts for Zeus. But in these early days, they were simply the strange and mighty sons of earth and sky, different from the Titans, more raw and primal in their power. And Gaia bore 3 more sons, being so terrible that their names would echo with fear through all the ages. The Hecatonchires, the 100-handed ones, were giants beyond imagining. Each had 50 heads that could see in all directions at once, and from each body sprouted 100 arms, each arm capable of wielding a boulder like a pebble. Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges were their names, and when they moved, the earth shook. When they fought, mountains crumbled. They were power incarnate, chaos given flesh, children of the earth who embodied her capacity for both creation and destruction. Uranus looked upon the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, and rather than pride, he felt fear. These monstrous children, strong and strange, seemed to him a threat to his dominion. They were too powerful, too unpredictable, too other. And so despite Gaia's protests, despite her cries of anguish, Uranus took these 6 children and forced them back into her womb, pushing them deep into the dark places of the earth, imprisoning them in the shadowed caverns of Tartarus, where no light reached and no voice echoed. He sealed them away as if they had never been born, trying to erase them from existence. Gaia groaned beneath their weight. The earth herself suffered with every moment her children remained trapped within her, unable to live, unable to die, suspended in a torment that had no end. She felt their pain as her own, for they were part of her, flesh of her flesh, born from her substance. Night after night, Uranus descended to lie with her, pressing the sky against the earth, and she endured it in growing agony and mounting rage. The pain built within Gaia until it became more than she could bear. From her own substance, from the gray flint that lay deep within her body, she fashioned a great sickle. She worked in secret, forming the weapon with care, making it sharp enough to cut through even divine flesh, strong enough to strike at a god. When it was complete, she went to her Titan children, the 12 who walked free beneath the sky, and she laid her suffering before them. "Your father has wronged me," she said, her voice carrying the weight of mountains. "He has caged your brothers, buried them in darkness, silenced the earth's song. He continues to crush me beneath his weight, to use me without thought for my pain or my will. Which of you will help your mother? Which of you dares to stand against your father?" The Titans shifted uneasily. Oceanus, eldest, remained silent, his waters still. Coeus and Creus looked away. Hyperion's bright eyes dimmed. Iapetus stood firm but spoke no word. One by one they turned from their earth mother's plea, unable or unwilling to face their father's wrath. The sky was vast, and Uranus was powerful beyond measure. What could they do against him? But Cronus, youngest and quietest, had been watching and thinking. While his brothers hesitated and his sisters mourned, he had been calculating, planning, waiting for this moment. He stepped forward from the shadows where he had been standing, and he met his mother's anguished eyes. "I will do it," he said simply. "Give me the blade." Gaia felt a surge of relief and gratitude. She placed the gray adamantine sickle in Cronus's hands, and together they plodded. That night, when Uranus descended as he always did, eager to embrace Gaia once more, she received him, and Cronus hid himself, watching, waiting. The sky pressed down upon the earth, and at the moment of greatest intimacy, Cronus sprang from his hiding place with the sickle gleaming in his hands. The blow was swift and sure. The blade bit through divine flesh, and Uranus's scream tore across the heavens. Cronus had castrated his father, severing the organs of generation, removing forever Uranus's ability to create new children, to continue his dominion over earth and sky. Blood fell from the wound, great drops of divine ichor that splashed upon Gaia's surface, and from each drop sprang new beings, born from violence and vengeance. The blood that soaked into the earth birthed the Gigantes, the giants, who would one day rise up against the Olympian gods in their own war for supremacy. It brought forth the Erinyes, the Furies, 3 terrible goddesses with wings like bats and hair of serpents, who would hunt down those who murdered their own kin, pursuing oath-breakers and kinslayers to the ends of the earth. And from that blood came the Melii, the ash tree nymphs who would serve as nurses to the first races of men. Cronus took the severed flesh and cast it far out into the sea. It fell into the waves and began to foam, the divine substance mixing with salt water, creating a white froth that gleamed in the starlight. The foam swirled and grew, taking shape, and from it emerged a goddess, fully formed, more beautiful than anything that had yet existed in the cosmos. Aphrodite, born not from the womb but from the sea, stepped onto the shore at Cyprus, radiant and perfect. She was desire incarnate, love given form, and her power would topple kingdoms and break heroes. Though born from violence, she embodied everything gentle and tender, the promise of love that makes life worth living. Uranus, wounded and defeated, withdrew into the upper reaches of the sky, never again to descend and embrace the earth. Before he fled into the heights, he spoke a curse that would echo through the ages, a prophecy that was both warning and revenge. "As you have overthrown me, so shall you be overthrown by your own son. The pattern is set, and it cannot be broken." Cronus heard the words, and something cold settled into his heart. But for now, he had what he wanted. The tyranny of Uranus was ended, and the age of the Titans had begun. The age of Titans, Cronus's reign in the Golden Age. With Uranus gone, retreating to the farthest reaches of the sky, never to trouble the earth again, Cronus took his place as the ruler of the cosmos. The youngest of the Titans had proven himself the boldest, the most willing to act when action was needed. And so to him fell the throne of heaven and earth. His brothers and sisters, the other Titans, acknowledged his supremacy, for he had done what they could not, what they dared not do. He had freed them all from their father's crushing embrace, and for that they owed him their allegiance. The first act of Cronus's reign was celebrated throughout the cosmos. He descended into the dark places of Tartarus and freed the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires, the monstrous brothers who had been imprisoned in the earth's depths. Gaia wept with awe-man relief as her long-suffering children emerged into the light at last, blinking in the brightness of a world they had never properly seen. It seemed in that moment that Cronus would be a just and benevolent ruler, that he would repair the wounds his father had inflicted and usher in an age of peace. But Cronus had not forgotten his father's final words. The prophecy haunted him, whispered at the edges of his thoughts during the day, visited him in dreams at night. As you overthrew your father, so shall you be overthrown by your own son. The words were a seed that took root in his mind, growing slowly but steadily into a twisted tree of fear and paranoia. Still, for a time, Cronus ruled well. The period of his dominion became known to later generations as the Golden Age, a time when the earth was generous and kind, when the cycles of seasons moved with gentle grace, when hardship and suffering were unknown. Mortals, newly created by Prometheus, himself a son of the Titan Iapetus, lived in harmony with the world. They did not need to toil, for the earth provided abundantly. They did not know war, for they had not yet learned to forge weapons or harbor grudges. They did not suffer illness or painful death, simply fading peacefully when their time came, like flowers at the end of summer. The Titans themselves took on the governance of the cosmos. Oceanus and Tethys brought forth the rivers and springs, the sources of fresh water that made life possible. Hyperion and Theia gave birth to Helios the sun, Selene the moon, and Eos the rosy-fingered dawn, who would rise each morning to announce the coming day. Coeus and Phoebe became parents to Leto and Asteria, goddesses who would play crucial roles in the next generation. The other Titans likewise took their places, each managing an aspect of the natural world, each contributing to the order and stability of Cronus's reign. Cronus himself took as his wife his sister Rhea, the flowing one, the embodiment of ease and generation. She was perfect in every way, a queen worthy of a king, gentle where he was harsh, merciful where he was stern. Their union should have been blessed, should have brought joy to the world and heirs to the throne who would carry forward the Titan line with honor. But the seed of fear that had been planted in Cronus's heart by his father's curse had taken root too deeply. When Rhea's belly first began to swell with child, Cronus felt not joy but terror. This child, he thought, could be the one. This child might be the one prophesied to overthrow him, just as he had overthrown Uranus. The pattern would repeat, as patterns always do, unless he found a way to break it. The child was born, a beautiful daughter with clear eyes and a peaceful countenance. Rhea named her Hestia, the hearth, for she would bring warmth and stability wherever she dwelt. She placed the baby in her husband's arms with pride and love, expecting him to share her joy. But Cronus looked down at his daughter, and all he could see was a threat to his power, a potential weapon that might one day be used against him. Without hesitation, without a word of explanation, Cronus opened his jaws wide and swallowed the infant whole. Hestia disappeared into the darkness of her father's belly, alive but imprisoned, trapped in a place from which there seemed to be no escape. Rhea screamed, her voice a wail of anguish that echoed across the mountains and valleys. She lunged at Cronus, but he was stronger, and he pushed her away with casual cruelty. "It is necessary," he told her, his voice cold and final. "The throne must be protected. The prophecy cannot be allowed to come true." Rhea wept, but her tears changed nothing. The seasons turned, and she grew pregnant again. This time she bore Demeter, goddess of the harvest, the grain, the fertile earth. But when Rhea presented the baby to Cronus, the same scene played out once more. He swallowed the child, ignoring his wife's pleas, deaf to her grief. Into the darkness of his belly went Demeter, trapped alongside her older sister. A third child came, Hera, who would have been the queen of heaven, the most powerful goddess of her generation. Cronus swallowed her too, adding her to the others he had consumed. A fourth child, Hades, lord of the unseen places, god of wealth and the dead, swallowed. A fifth child, Poseidon, who should have ruled the seas and shaken the earth, swallowed. 5 times Rhea gave birth, and 5 times her children were stolen from her, vanishing into the abyss of their father's paranoia. The great mother of gods became a shell of grief, hollow-eyed and silent, forced to endure the very tyranny she had helped Cronus end. She had supported him in his rebellion against Uranus, had stood by his side as he took the throne, and this was how he repaid her trust and love. But when Rhea felt the sixth child quicken in her womb, something changed. The baby moved differently, stronger than the others, almost eager. Rhea felt in her bones that this child was special, that this child represented not just her own hope for revenge, but the hope of the entire cosmos for a better world. She could not allow Cronus to devour this one as he had the others. As her time drew near, Rhea fled. She left the halls where Cronus held court and made her way south and east, across mountains and through valleys, until she came to the island of Crete. There, in a deep cave on Mount Ida by Merida, hidden among towering cypress trees and guarded by springs that sang with ancient magic, Rhea gave birth to her youngest son. She named him Zeus, which some say means bright sky or daylight, the hope that comes with dawn after the long darkness of night. But Zeus's birth had to remain secret. Cronus could not know that his sixth child had survived, that the prophecy remained unfulfilled and dangerous. Rhea needed something to give her husband, something he would accept without question. She gathered up a large stone from the hillside, roughly the size and weight of a newborn, and wrapped it carefully in swaddling clothes, binding it tight so that its true nature would not be immediately apparent. With the stone baby in her arms, Rhea returned to Cronus. She presented him with the bundle, her face a mask of resignation and defeat, as if she had finally accepted the necessity of what he was doing. Cronus barely glanced at what she offered him. He was so consumed by his fear, so certain that any child of his would be his doom, that he did not pause to examine what Rhea had brought. He simply opened his mouth and swallowed the stone whole, convinced that he had just consumed his sixth and final child. Meanwhile, on Crete, the true Zeus remained hidden in his mountain cave, the Dictaean cave as it would later be known, or sometimes the Idaean cave depending on which account one follows. The infant could not be allowed to cry, lest the sound carry on the wind to Cronus's ears. So Rhea called upon the Curetes, the young warriors of Crete, to guard the cave and protect her son. The Curetes danced around the entrance, clashing their spears against their shields, creating such a cacophony that any noise the baby made was drowned out by their martial music. Zeus was nursed by the goat Amalthea, a creature of divine or semi-divine nature, whose milk was so rich and pure that it granted the growing god-child strength beyond measure. Some versions of the tale say Amalthea was a nymph who owned a magical goat, others that she was the goat herself, blessed with intelligence and devotion. Either way, her contribution to Zeus's survival was so significant that later, after she died, Zeus honored her by taking her hide and making it into his invincible shield, the Aegis, and by setting her image among the stars as the constellation Capricorn. The infant Zeus thrived in his secret sanctuary. He grew rapidly, as divine children do, nourished by the goat's milk, protected by the warrior dancers, loved by the nymphs who dwelt in the mountain forests. The stories say that bees brought him honey from hidden hives, that doves brought him ambrosia, the food of the gods, that the mountain itself cradled him with the tenderness of a second mother. Gaia, the great Earth Mother, kept watch over her grandson, for she saw in him the fulfillment of the prophecy she had once encouraged, the instrument of justice against Cronus's tyranny. As Zeus grew from infant to boy to young man, he learned the truth of his parentage, learned what had been done to his siblings, learned of his father's paranoia and cruelty. The nymph Melissa, the honeybee, taught him wisdom. The warrior Curetes taught him strength and martial skill. And Gaia herself taught him the ways of the earth, the deep truths of the cosmos, the knowledge he would need to fulfill his destiny. Meanwhile, far away in his celestial palace, Cronus sat on his throne, believing himself secure. He had swallowed all his children, or so he thought. The prophecy could not touch him now. He had broken the pattern, evaded fate, outsmarted destiny itself. 5 children were trapped in his belly, alive but helpless, unable to escape or challenge him. The 6th, the stone, lay heavy in his gut, a constant reminder of his victory over prophecy. But of course, Cronus had not outsmarted fate. He had only delayed it. And delay, as the Titans would soon learn, is not the same as prevention. On Mount Ida, hidden among the cypress and olive trees, Zeus was growing stronger with each passing season. preparing for the day when he would confront his father and reclaim his stolen siblings. The patterns the primordial gods had set in motion continued to turn. Just as Cronus had overthrown Uranus, so would Zeus overthrow Cronus. But this cycle would be different. Zeus would not simply replace one tyrant with another. He would establish a new order, a new way of ruling, one that might finally bring lasting peace to the cosmos. Or so, at least, the young god hoped as he trained in secret, gathering his strength for the war that was coming, the war that would shake the foundations of creation and determine who would rule the universe for ages to come. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the Titanomachy, the greatest war the cosmos had ever seen, was about to begin. The Titanomachy, War of Gods and Titans. Zeus remained in hiding on Mount Ida for many years, but there came a time when concealment was no longer possible, no longer desirable. He had grown into his full power, and the strength that coursed through his divine body demanded action. The knowledge of his siblings' imprisonment, the understanding of his father's tyranny, burned in him like a flame that could not be extinguished. Gaia, his grandmother, came to him in the sacred groves and spoke the words he had been waiting to hear. "The time has come, Zeus. The cosmos suffers under Cronus's paranoid rule. Your brothers and sisters cry out from their prison. You must act." But Zeus was not rash or foolish, despite his youth and power. He knew he could not simply storm his father's palace and demand the throne. Cronus was mighty, backed by many of the Titans, ruling an ordered cosmos that had stood for ages. To challenge him directly would be to invite defeat. Zeus needed allies, needed a plan, needed something that would give him an advantage against the older generation of gods. Once again, it was Gaia who guided him. She led Zeus to Metis, the Oceanid, daughter of Oceanus and Tethys, whose name meant cunning intelligence or wise counsel. Metis was renowned among the lesser deities for her cleverness, her ability to see paths and solutions that others missed. She was a goddess who understood transformation, who could change her shape at will, who knew the secret ways that wind through the cosmos like hidden rivers. Zeus approached Metis with respect and explained his need. She listened. When he had finished, she nodded slowly. "I can help you," she said. "But what you ask is dangerous, Zeus. Once you begin this path, there is no turning back. Are you prepared to see it through, no matter what comes?" "I am," Zeus replied without hesitation. Together, Zeus and Metis crafted a plan. Metis mixed a potion, a powerful emetic disguised in the form of a sweet drink, flavored with honey and nectar, irresistible to any who tasted it. Zeus took this potion without them concealing it carefully, and for the first time in his life, he left the safety of Crete and made his way to his father's palace. The exact manner of Zeus's infiltration varies in the telling. Some say he disguised himself as a cupbearer, a servant whose task was to pour wine and serve food at the high table. Others say he simply appeared, young and seemingly harmless, claiming to seek service in Cronus's court. However it happened, Zeus found himself in his father's presence, close enough to act. He offered Cronus the potion, presenting it as a gift, a rare vintage of exceptional quality. Cronus, secure in his power and seeing no threat in this youth, whom he did not recognize as his own son, accepted the drink. He raised it to his lips and drank deeply, savoring the sweetness. Almost immediately, the potion took effect. Cronus doubled over, his belly heaving, and then he began to vomit, great racking spasms that shook his divine body. What emerged from his mouth was nothing mortal eyes should ever witness. First came the stone that Rhea had given him, the false baby that had deceived him all those years ago. It tumbled out and crashed to the floor, still wrapped in its ancient swaddling clothes. Then, one by one, came the gods themselves. Poseidon emerged first, fully grown, gleaming with power, the sea foam still clinging to his divine form. Then Hades, dark and stern, blinking in the sudden light after years in darkness. Then Hera, proud and fierce, her eyes immediately seeking whoever had freed them. Then Demeter, nurturing and strong. And finally Hestia, eldest of them all, calm and centered even in the chaos of her rebirth. They stood there, the five gods, born twice, first from their mother's womb and now from their father's belly. They looked around at the palace, at their father who had imprisoned them, at the youth who had freed them. And when Zeus revealed himself, when he told them who he was and what he proposed, they recognized in him a leader worth following. They had spent years in darkness, trapped and helpless, while he had grown strong and free. More importantly, he offered them what they all craved: vengeance, freedom, and a chance to reshape the world according to a better vision. But six gods, even divine ones, could not defeat all the Titans alone. Cronus had ruled for too long, had too many allies, commanded too much loyalty. When he recovered from the shock of losing his children and realized that war was coming, he called upon his brothers and sisters to defend the old order. Many of them answered his call. From Mount Othrys in Thessaly, the ancient seat of Titan power, Cronus gathered his forces. His brothers Creus, Iapetus, and Hyperion stood with him, along with others of the older generation. They were experienced, powerful, and numerous. They knew the ways of war from the battles fought during the overthrow of Uranus. They would not yield the cosmos easily. But some Titans refused to fight. Oceanus, eldest of them all, remained neutral, neither opposing the young gods nor actively supporting them. He had seen enough of war, enough of the cycles of violence that seemed to consume each generation. He retreated to his palace beneath the waves and watched as the cosmos tore itself apart once more. Themis, goddess of divine law, foresaw which side would ultimately prevail and joined Zeus, becoming one of his most trusted advisors. Prometheus, son of the Titan Iapetus, chose the side of the Olympians, recognizing in Zeus a ruler who might actually bring lasting peace. His brother Epimetheus followed his lead, though with less wisdom and more hesitation. The war began slowly, with skirmishes and raids, each side testing the other's strength and resolve. But it quickly escalated into something far more catastrophic. For 10 years the battle raged, a decade of cosmic violence that shook the earth to its foundations and darkened the sun with smoke and ash. Mountains were torn from their roots and hurled like spears. Valleys were carved by errant lightning bolts. The seas boiled where fire and water met, and the air itself became a weapon, compressed into blasts that could level forests. The Titans fought from Mount Othrys, their ancient stronghold, a peak that scraped the heavens and commanded a view of all Thessaly. Zeus and his siblings, along with their allies, took their stand on Mount Olympus, the highest mountain in Greece, a place that had remained neutral ground until now, but would forever after be synonymous with divine power. The two mountains became fortresses, and between them, the battlefield stretched for hundreds of miles, scarred by divine conflict. In the early years of the war, neither side could gain a decisive advantage. The Titans had experience in the strength that comes from ages of rule. They knew the secret ways of the cosmos, understood how to manipulate the forces of nature to their advantage. Hyperion would send waves of searing light that could blind and burn. Iapetus would strike with the weight of mortality itself, reminding the young gods that even they could be wounded, could feel pain, could know the touch of death. Creus marshaled the constellations themselves, and the stars became weapons in his hands, falling like burning arrows from the night sky. But Zeus and his siblings had something the Titans lacked: desperation born from years of imprisonment, fury at the injustice they had suffered, and youth's certainty that they could not lose. Zeus wielded the lightning that had always been his birthright, though he had not yet found the true mastery of it. Poseidon commanded the seas, sending tsunamis crashing against the Titan lines. Hades opened up chasms in the earth, swallowing Titan forces whole and burying them alive. Hera's strategic mind directed their campaigns. Demeter denied the earth's bounty to those who opposed them. Hestia held their base secure, ensuring that Olympus remained inviolate, a sanctuary where the wounded could recover and new strategies could be forged. The war ground on, year after year, with neither side able to deliver a killing blow. The world suffered terribly. Mortals, those first humans created during the Golden Age, huddled in caves and cried out to any god who might listen, but the gods were too busy fighting each other to hear mortal prayers. The earth itself groaned under the weight of divine conflict. Rivers ran red and forests burned. It was Gaia, once again, who provided the key to victory. She came to Zeus in the 10th year of the war and reminded him of what Cronus had done at the start of his reign, of those children who had been freed only to be imprisoned again. The Cyclopes and the Hecatonchires still languished in Tartarus, locked away by Cronus, who feared their power just as his father had. These beings, Gaia pointed out, could turn the tide of the war. Zeus listened, and he understood. Alone or with a few companions, the stories differ, he descended into Tartarus, into the deepest prison of the cosmos, where the air was thick and the darkness absolute. He found the Cyclopes first, those three brothers with their single eyes, masters of the forge and the flame. For years they had languished in chains, their skills unused, their strength wasted. Zeus broke their bonds and offered them freedom and a place in the new order he would establish. The Cyclopes, their gratitude as immense as their relief, promised to repay Zeus's kindness. Brontes, Steropes, and Argus set to work immediately, and their hands, which had been idle for so long, remembered their craft. They forged weapons of incredible power, tools that would become the symbols of the Olympian gods for all time. For Zeus, they created the thunderbolt, a spear of pure lightning that could pierce any defense and shatter any shield. For Poseidon, they fashioned the trident, a three-pronged spear that could command the seas, split the earth, and call up storms. For Hades, they crafted the helm of darkness, a helmet that rendered its wearer completely invisible, perfect for the god who would one day rule the unseen realm of the dead. Then Zeus ventured deeper still to where the Hecatonchires dwelt. Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges, the 100-handed ones, the giants with 50 heads, 100 arms each, had suffered even more than the Cyclopes. But they remembered Zeus's grandmother, Gaia, who had mourned their imprisonment. They remembered the promise of freedom. When Zeus offered them the chance to fight, to unleash their strength upon those who had kept them chained, they agreed with a fervor that shook the foundations of Tartarus itself. With these new allies, the tide of the war shifted dramatically. The Cyclopes armed not just Zeus and his brothers, but also the other gods who fought alongside them. Suddenly, every Olympian warrior carried weapons of unparalleled power, tools that could match or even exceed the natural forces the Titans commanded. And the Hecatonchires were catastrophe personified. Each of the three brothers could hurl hundreds of boulders simultaneously, creating storms of stone that darkened the sky and crushed everything in their path. They could fight 100 opponents at once, their many arms never tiring, their multiple heads always alert to danger from every angle. When they entered the battlefield, even the mightiest Titans quailed. The final battle was apocalyptic. Zeus stood at the forefront, wielding his lightning, each bolt brighter and more terrible than the last. The thunder that accompanied each strike was so loud it could be heard in the farthest corners of creation. Poseidon summoned waves that reached to the clouds, drowning the enemy forces, carving new coastlines with each surge. Hades moved unseen among the Titan ranks, his helm of darkness making him a phantom warrior who struck without warning. The Hecatonchires surrounded the Titans' position, Briareus to the north, Cottus to the south, Gyges to the west, and their hail of boulders blotted out the sun. Mount Othrys itself began to crumble under the assault, its ancient stones unable to withstand such punishment. Hyperion fell first among the great Titans, his light dimmed by Zeus's lightning. Iapetus was cast down by the combined might of Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. Creus was seized by the Hecatonchires and hurled from the heights. One by one, the Titans who had stood against the new order were defeated, broken, brought low. Cronus fought to the very end, the last Titan standing, refusing to yield even as his forces crumbled around him. He faced Zeus alone, father against son, old order against new. Their battle was personal and vicious, each knowing that one of them would not walk away. Cronus fought with all the skill and power of his ages, wielding the very fabric of time itself as a weapon. But Zeus had youth, rage, justice, and the weapons forged by the Cyclopes. Most importantly, Zeus had his siblings fighting alongside him, coordinating their attacks, supporting each other in ways Cronus had never understood. When Cronus finally fell, exhausted and defeated, Zeus did not kill him. Some stories say that Cronus was imprisoned in Tartarus along with the other defeated Titans, chained in the darkest pit, condemned to an eternity of punishment for his crimes. Others say that Zeus, showing mercy his father had never known, exiled Cronus to the Islands of the Blessed, a pleasant place at the edge of the world where he could rule peacefully over the spirits of dead heroes, finally finding the peace that had eluded him in his paranoid reign. The defeated Titans were dragged to Tartarus, that deep abyss beneath the earth. The Hecatonchires, in gratitude for their freedom, became the jailers of their former captors. They stood guard over bronze gates that could never be breached, ensuring that the Titans would never again threaten the peace of the cosmos. Atlas, Iapetus' son, who had commanded the Titan forces in battle, received a special punishment. He was compelled to hold up the sky for all eternity, bearing on his shoulders the weight of the heavens, a burden that could never be set down, a sentence that would never end. Not all Titans were punished. Those who had remained neutral or who had actively aided the Olympians were allowed to keep their positions. Oceanus still commanded the great river that encircled the world. Themis sat in honor at Zeus's right hand as advisor and counselor. The younger Titans who had taken no part in the war were left in peace to govern their various domains. The new order Zeus decreed would not be built on wholesale slaughter, but on justice tempered with mercy. The war was over. The Titans had fallen, and the Olympians had risen. But victory brought new challenges. Now Zeus and his siblings had to decide how to rule, how to divide the cosmos they had won, and how to establish an order that would last, that would not fall to the same cycles of violence and overthrow that had consumed the previous generations. The world had been won, but the real work was just beginning. The Olympian Order, Masters of Mount Olympus. In the aftermath of the Titanomachy, as the dust settled and the fires died down, the victorious gods gathered on the summit of Mount Olympus to determine the future. The mountain itself seemed to recognize the significance of the moment. Its peak rose higher than any other, piercing the clouds, existing in a space between earth and the pure upper air where only gods could breathe. From its heights, one could see the entirety of Greece spread out below, mortal cities like scattered seeds, rivers threading silver through the landscape, seas glittering at the edges of the world. Zeus stood before his siblings and allies, the lightning-scarred earth below them a testament to what they had just endured. They had won the war together, each contributing their strength and skill to the victory. Now came the question that every victor must face: how to divide the spoils. The three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, recognized that they could not all rule equally without friction. The cosmos was too vast, its governance too complex for shared rulership to work smoothly. They needed clear divisions, specific realms for each to govern according to his nature and strengths. Some accounts say they debated long and seriously about how to make this division. Others say they simply cast lots, letting fate decide what their father's fear had never allowed him to grant them freely: a kingdom of their own. However the decision was made, the result was this: Zeus claimed the sky, the broad heavens, the air and clouds, and all the space between earth and the farthest stars. His would be the domain of weather and wind, of lightning that struck from on high, of the eagle that soared above all other birds. More than this, Zeus would be king of the gods, the one whose word would be final in disputes, whose judgment would determine matters of cosmic importance. He would sit the throne on Mount Olympus, and from there he would govern not just his own realm, but oversee the balance of all creation. Poseidon received the seas, those vast waters that covered more of the earth than the land did, deep and mysterious, teeming with life both wondrous and terrible. His kingdom included not just the salt oceans, but all waters, rivers that flowed to the sea, springs that bubbled up from hidden sources, even underground streams that carved paths through stone in perpetual darkness. With his trident, Poseidon could split the earth or calm the wildest waves, could call forth tsunamis or create safe passage through treacherous currents. He was tempestuous, changeable as the sea itself, capable of great kindness and equally great cruelty. Hades drew the underworld, the shadowed realm beneath the earth where the souls of the dead would come to dwell. It was not considered a punishment, this division, though later ages might see it that way. The underworld was necessary, death was part of the natural order, and someone needed to govern that transition, to maintain the boundary between life and death, to ensure that the dead stayed dead and the living remained above. Hades accepted his lot with characteristic stoicism. He would rule the unseen places, would judge the souls that came before him, would guard the precious metals and gems that lay buried in the earth's deep places. His realm was dark but not evil, necessary but not welcomed. He wore his helm of darkness and retreated to his kingdom, leaving the upper world to his brothers. The earth itself, the surface world, Gaia's body, was declared common territory, open to all the gods to walk upon, to influence, to draw worship from. The mountains could belong to one deity, the forest to another, a particular river to a third, but the land as a whole was shared. This was partly pragmatic, a way to avoid further conflict, and partly respectful, an acknowledgement that the earth was their grandmother and could not be claimed by any single being. The three sisters, though powerful in their own right, were given different roles in this new order. Hestia, eldest of all the siblings, chose for herself the most humble yet most essential position. She became goddess of the hearth, the fire at the center of every home, the symbol of family and domestic peace. She asked for no great temple, no grand adventures, no dramatic myths. She simply tended the sacred fire on Olympus that must never be allowed to go out, and she blessed every household fire in the mortal world. In her quiet way, she was present in more places than any other god, for every home had a hearth, and thus every home held a piece of Hestia's divine presence. Demeter, goddess of the harvest and agriculture, of grain and growing things, took as her domain the fertile earth, the crop-bearing fields, the cycle of sowing and reaping that would sustain mortal life. She was generous and nurturing, but she could also be stern and demanding, for the earth gives its bounty only to those who understand its rhythms and respect its seasons. Farmers would pray to Demeter before planting and after harvest, knowing that their survival depended on her goodwill. Hera became Zeus's wife, his queen, the goddess of marriage and family, of oaths sworn and promises kept. She was regal, commanding, powerful in her own right, possessed of a pride that could turn to terrible vengeance when challenged or disrespected. Her relationship with Zeus would be complex, marked by loyalty and betrayal, cooperation and conflict, love and resentment. She would spend much of her divine existence dealing with Zeus's infidelities, punishing his lovers and illegitimate children, asserting her authority as Queen of Heaven even when her husband sought to undermine it. But the Olympian court did not consist only of these 6 siblings, the first generation born from Cronus and Rhea. In time, Zeus and the other gods would have children, and some of these children would rise to become Olympians themselves, major deities worthy of thrones and temples, shapers of mortal fate and cosmic order. Athena's birth was perhaps the strangest and most emblematic of Zeus's new reign. After the war, Zeus had taken the Oceanid Mati as his lover, the same clever goddess who had helped him free his siblings from Cronus's belly. But when Medea became pregnant, Zeus learned from Gaia and Uranus's old prophecy that Medus's child would be powerful beyond measure, and that if Medus bore a son, that son would eventually overthrow Zeus, just as Zeus had overthrown his own father. The cycle threatened to repeat once more. Zeus, perhaps remembering his father's paranoia and its disastrous results, tried to think of a solution that would break the pattern. He could not simply imprison the child, could not become the tyrant he had fought against, but neither could he risk losing his hard-won throne to prophecy. In a moment of desperate cunning that Métis herself might have admired, Zeus tricked her into transforming into a fly, then swallowed her whole. Inside Zeus, Métis continued her pregnancy, but now trapped within the god-king's body. She crafted armor and weapons for her unborn child, working in the dark spaces behind Zeus's eyes, forging and hammering until Zeus's head throbbed with unbearable pain. The pain grew worse and worse until Zeus thought his skull would split apart. He called for Hephaestus and commanded the god of the forge to strike his head with an axe to release the pressure. Hephaestus, either brave or foolhardy enough to strike his father with a weapon, brought his axe down on Zeus's brow. The skull split open, and from it emerged Athena, fully grown, fully armored, already holding a spear and wearing a helmet that gleamed like polished bronze. She let out a war cry that echoed across Olympus, and the other gods drew back in awe and fear. Here was a goddess born not from the womb, but from pure thought, embodying wisdom and warfare in equal measure, strategic and fierce, beautiful and terrifying. Zeus's head closed immediately, leaving no scar, and the prophecy was both fulfilled and circumvented. Athena was indeed powerful beyond measure, but she was a daughter, not a son, and she became not her father's enemy, but his favorite child, the one he trusted most, the one he allowed to carry his Aegis shield and wield his thunderbolt when necessary. She was the goddess of wisdom, of just warfare, as opposed to the mindless slaughter that Ares represented, of crafts and civilization, of the olive tree that would become Greece's most precious resource. She would be patron of heroes, protector of cities, advisor to kings. Apollo and Artemis were born together, divine twins, children of Zeus and the Titaness Leto. Their birth was complicated by Hera's jealousy. The Queen of Heaven, furious at yet another of Zeus's affairs, decreed that Leto would find no place on earth to give birth. She sent the serpent Python to pursue the pregnant Titaness, and she forbade every land from offering Leto shelter. Poor Leto wandered across the world, her labor beginning, desperately seeking a place safe enough to deliver her children. Finally, the floating island of Delos took pity on her. Delos, which had no fixed location and thus was not technically subject to Hera's decree, welcomed Leto. There, clinging to a palm tree, Leto first gave birth to Artemis. The newborn goddess, demonstrating her divine nature immediately, then helped deliver her twin brother, Apollo. From that moment, Artemis was the protector of women in childbirth, the helper of mothers, the guardian of young things. Apollo became the god of light, though not the sun itself, which was driven by Helios, of music and poetry, of prophecy and healing, of plague and purification. He was the far shooter, the archer whose arrows never missed, who could strike his enemies from a great distance with divine accuracy. His lyre could charm all who heard it, and his oracles spoke the will of fate itself. When he came of age, one of his first acts was to hunt down the python that had tormented his mother, slaying it at Delphi and establishing there the most famous oracle in all of Greece. Artemis chose to remain forever virgin, devoted to the hunt and the wilderness. She became the goddess of wild animals, of untamed places, of the moon that lit the night sky for hunters and hunted alike. She gathered around her a band of nymphs who shared her vow of chastity, and together they ranged through forests and over mountains, their bows singing as they brought down deer and boar. She was fierce in protecting the young and the innocent, but she could be equally fierce in punishing those who offended her or violated her sacred spaces. Hermes was born in a cave on Mount Selene in Arcadia, the son of Zeus and the nymph Maia. From his first moments, Hermes demonstrated an impish cleverness that would define his character. On the day he was born, still a swaddled infant, he crawled out of his cradle, found a tortoise, killed it, and used its shell to create the first lyre. Then, still on his first day of life, he stole Apollo's cattle, cleverly disguising their tracks by making them walk backward and tying brooms to their tails to sweep away any evidence. Apollo, furious at the theft, tracked down the infant thief and dragged him before Zeus to demand justice. But baby Hermes played innocent so convincingly, and his theft had been so creative, that Zeus couldn't help but laugh. He made Hermes return the cattle, or most of them, but he also recognized in this child a useful messenger and mediator. Hermes became the herald of the gods, the guide of travelers, the patron of merchants, thieves, and all who lived by their wits. He was fleet of foot, wearing winged sandals that let him fly through the air, and he carried the caduceus, a staff entwined with serpents that marked him as Zeus's official messenger. He guided the souls of the dead to the underworld, slipping easily between the realm of the living and the realm of Hades, serving as psychopomp, the escort of souls. Ares, the god of war in its most brutal aspect, was the son of Zeus and Hera, one of the few legitimate children of their troubled marriage. But he brought his parents no joy. Ares was bloodthirsty, violent, and impulsive, representing not the strategic warfare of Athena, but the mindless slaughter, the chaos of battle, the bloodlust that transformed soldiers into beasts. The other gods generally disliked him, finding his love of violence distasteful even by divine standards. Even his own parents had little affection for him. Yet Ares was necessary, for war was part of the human experience, and someone had to embody it, to give it form and name. Ares had an affair with Aphrodite, the goddess of love who had risen from the sea foam when Cronus castrated Uranus. Aphrodite was married to Hephaestus, the god of the forge, but she found the limping smith god uninteresting compared to the muscular, virile Ares. Their affair was famous and scandalous, and eventually Hephaestus caught them in a magical net and displayed them to all the gods, humiliating them both. Yet Aphrodite cared little for shame or reputation. She was desire incarnate, beauty personified, and her power over gods and mortals alike was absolute. Where she walked, flowers bloomed and hearts surrendered. Hephaestus himself had a strange entrance into the Olympian family. Some say he was born to Hera alone, without Zeus's involvement, created by Hera in a fit of jealous pride after Zeus gave birth to Athena without her. Other accounts say Zeus was his father, but that Hera, disgusted by her son's deformity and ugliness, threw him from Olympus in shame. Hephaestus fell for a day and a night, crashing eventually into the ocean, where the sea nymphs Thetis and Eurynome found him and raised him in an underwater grotto. There he learned the smith's craft, working with fire and metal, creating works of breathtaking beauty and incredible power. When Hephaestus returned to Olympus years later, he was the greatest craftsman in creation, and his skill earned him a place among the major gods despite his physical imperfection. He created the palaces where the gods dwelt, forged weapons and armor of unsurpassable quality, and built automatons of bronze that walked and worked as if alive. His forge was said to be beneath volcanoes, and when he worked, the mountains would smoke and rumble with his efforts. Dionysus, the last to join the Olympian 12, had perhaps the most unusual parentage of all. He was born twice, first from his mother Semele, a mortal princess of Thebes, who was blasted to ash when she asked to see Zeus in his true divine form. Zeus snatched the unborn child from her burning womb and sewed him into his own thigh, carrying the infant to term himself. When Dionysus was finally born, he emerged from Zeus's leg, making him the twice-born god, the deity who had experienced both mortality and divinity, death and resurrection. Dionysus became the god of wine, of ecstatic celebration, of theater and transformation. His worship was ecstatic and frenzied, involving intoxication, dancing, and states of divine madness where mortals could transcend their everyday selves. He traveled the world with a retinue of maenads, frenzied female followers, and satyrs, goat-legged nature spirits, spreading his cult and punishing those who refused to acknowledge his divinity. Despite his often playful demeanor, Dionysus could be terrifying in his wrath, driving mortals mad or tearing them apart when they disrespected him or his followers. These were the major Olympians, though their number and identities sometimes shifted, depending on the source. Some lists included Hestia, but excluded Dionysus. Others included both, but stretched the 12 to 13 or 14. The exact count mattered less than the fact that these deities, from their throne on Mount Olympus, now governed the cosmos and shaped the fate of mortals. Life on Olympus was both splendid and contentious. The gods dwelt in palaces of crystal and gold, feasted on ambrosia and nectar that sustained their immortality, and spent their days in pursuits both noble and petty. They intervened constantly in mortal affairs, taking sides in wars, falling in love with humans, blessing their favorites and cursing their enemies. Their relationships with each other were complicated, marked by alliances and feuds that shifted like the weather Zeus controlled. Zeus himself, though king of the gods, was not omnipotent or infallible. He was constrained by fate, bound by oaths, subject to the judgment of other gods when his actions became too tyrannical. His reign was more stable than his father's or grandfather's had been, but it was not without challenges. Giants would rise against him. The monster Typhon would nearly overthrow him. His authority would be questioned and tested in 1,000 ways. But the Olympian order endured. Unlike Uranus, who had been castrated and exiled, unlike Cronus, who had been imprisoned or banished, Zeus remained in power, adapting to circumstances, learning from the mistakes of his predecessors. He established a court, sought counsel from wise goddesses like Themis and Metis, or her wisdom living within him, and tried, however imperfectly, to balance justice with mercy. The age of the Olympians had truly begun. From their mountain heights, they would watch over the mortal world, intervening, protecting, punishing, loving, and being loved in turn. And though their era would eventually wane as other powers rose in the world, for now they stood supreme, masters of heaven and earth, the gods who had won the cosmos and would shape its story for ages to come. Aina, the realm of the dead, Hades and the underworld. While Zeus ruled the bright sky and Poseidon commanded the restless seas, their brother Hades governed a realm that few dared to name aloud. The underworld, the land of the dead, the house of Hades, was a place of shadows and silence, where mortal souls journeyed after death to spend eternity in a reflection of the lives they had lived above. It was not precisely hell, not a place of active torment for most who dwelt there, but neither was it paradise. It was simply the place where the dead went when their time on earth was finished, and Hades was its stern, unyielding master. To reach the underworld, a soul had to embark on a final journey, one from which there could be no return. The journey began at the moment of death, when the psyche, the essence of the person, separated from the body and began its descent. Hermes, in his role as psychopomp, often guided the newly dead, leading them along the paths only spirits could travel, down, down, ever downward, leaving the sunlit world behind. The geography of the underworld was complex, a shadowed mirror of the world above. The primary entrance lay far to the west, beyond the ocean that encircled the known world, in a land of perpetual twilight, where the sun never quite rose and never quite set. But there were other entrances scattered across Greece and beyond, deep caverns that descended into the earth, volcanic vents that leaked sulfurous smoke, certain groves sacred to chthonic deities where the boundary between worlds grew thin. The first landmark a soul would encounter was the Acheron, the river of woe, or in some accounts, the Styx, the river of hatred. 5 rivers wound through the underworld, each carrying its own quality, its own essence. The Styx was the most famous, the river of oaths and hatred. Its waters flowed 9 times around the underworld, and even the gods swore their most binding vows upon it. To break an oath sworn by the Styx meant punishment severe beyond imagining, a year of breathlessness followed by 9 years of exile from divine company. The nymph Styx, the river's living embodiment, had sided with Zeus during the Titanomachy, and in reward Zeus made her waters the instrument of unbreakable promises. It was said that the Styx could make mortals invulnerable if they bathed in it, but only if the person survived the experience, which few did. The Acheron, the river of pain, wailed with the voices of suffering souls. Its dark waters were cold beyond measure, carrying the anguish of the dead to every corner of the underworld. To cross the Acheron was to leave behind forever any hope of return. The Lethe flowed slow and yellow, the river of forgetfulness. Those who drank from it lost all memory of their previous lives, their identities dissolving into the waters, leaving them as blank and purposeless as newborn infants. In some accounts, souls drank from the Lethe before being reborn, ensuring they began their next life with no knowledge of what had come before. The Phlegethon burned with eternal fire, its riverbed a stream of molten flame that tormented those consigned to it. It flowed toward the depths of Tartarus, carrying heat and pain to that lowest region. And the Cocytus, the river of lamentation, echoed with the wailing of those who could find no rest, the unbearable grief of souls separated forever from those they loved. To cross these rivers, particularly the Acheron or the Styx, a soul needed the services of Charon, the ferryman of the dead. Charon was ancient, grim, and eternally irritable, a figure with gray skin, burning eyes, and a filthy cloak that reeked of death. He pulled his ferry across the waters, transporting the dead from one shore to the other, but he demanded payment for the journey. This is why the Greeks placed a coin, usually an obol, in the mouth of their dead during burial rites. Without payment, a soul was left to wander the near shore for 100 years before Charon would finally consent to carry them across. Once across the river, the dead found themselves at the gates of the underworld proper. These gates were guarded by Cerberus, the monstrous hound of Hades, Cerberus had 3 heads, some accounts gave him 50 or even 100, a serpent for a tail, and snakes growing from his back. His task was simple but effective. He allowed all souls to enter the underworld, but he permitted none to leave. His many heads could watch in all directions at once, and his appetite for living flesh was legendary. Only the greatest heroes, armed with divine assistance and tremendous courage, ever managed to get past Cerberus, and even then, only temporarily. Beyond Cerberus lay the Judgment Hall, where the newly dead appeared before 3 judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. These 3 had been kings during their mortal lives, rulers renowned for their wisdom and justice. Upon their deaths, they had been appointed by Hades to judge the souls that entered his realm, to determine where each spirit should spend eternity based on how they had lived their earthly life. Minos, who had once ruled Crete, served as the chief judge, particularly in cases that required his legendary wisdom to untangle. Rhadamanthus judged the souls of those from Asia and the eastern lands, while Aeacus judged those from Europe and the West. They listened to each soul's defense, weighed their actions, considered their intentions, and pronounced sentence. For most souls, the sentence was the Asphodel Meadows, the neutral zone of the underworld. This was a vast gray plain where asphodel flowers grew in endless, identical rows. Here dwelt the majority of the dead, those who had been neither exceptionally good nor exceptionally bad. They wandered aimlessly, insubstantial as shadows, unable to feel joy or pain, barely conscious of their own existence. They were not tortured, but neither did they experience anything that could be called happiness. They simply were, eternally, ghosts of their former selves, remembering their lives as if through a fog, unable to interact meaningfully with anything or anyone. Homer's Odyssey contains a vivid description of this place when Odysseus journeys to the underworld to seek counsel from the prophet Tiresias. The shades he encounters there are pathetic, barely able to speak until he gives them blood to drink, which temporarily restores some measure of their consciousness and memory. Even the greatest heroes seem diminished in the Asphodel Meadows, reduced to pale imitations of their living selves. But for some souls, the judges pronounced different sentences. Those who had lived lives of exceptional virtue, who had achieved great things, who had been favorites of the All, were sent to Elysium, also called the Elysian Fields or the Isles of the Blessed. This was a paradise within the underworld, a place of eternal spring where flowers always bloomed, where gentle breezes blew, where the blessed dead feasted and danced and enjoyed an afterlife of ease and pleasure. Originally, Elysium was reserved for those related to the gods, demigods, and children of divine parents. But over time, the criteria expanded to include particularly righteous or heroic mortals, those whose deeds in life had earned them eternal reward. In some accounts, Elysium existed on islands far to the west, beyond the known world, washed by the ocean, blessed by eternal sunshine. In others, it was a region of the underworld itself, set apart and protected, unreachable by ordinary shades. Rhadamanthus ruled over Elysium, ensuring that the blessed dead were never disturbed by the sorrows of the less fortunate. A very few souls, those who managed to be reborn and live 3 virtuous lives in a row, ascending to Elysium each time, were granted access to the Isles of the Blessed, an even more exclusive paradise where the greatest heroes of all time dwelt in eternal joy. At the opposite extreme from Elysium lay Tartarus, the pit of punishment, the hell of Greek mythology. Tartarus existed far beneath even the normal underworld, as far below Hades as earth was below heaven. It was a place of active, eternal torment, reserved for the worst offenders against the gods, those who had committed crimes so heinous that the judges felt compelled to punish them forever. Tartarus had been the prison of the Titans after the Titanomachy, but it also held certain mortals whose sins demanded eternal punishment. These individuals became famous in myth for their suffering. Tantalus, who had served his own son as food to test whether the gods could be deceived, stood forever in a pool of water beneath branches heavy with fruit. When he bent to drink, the water receded. When he reached for the fruit, the branches drew back. He suffered eternal hunger and thirst, with relief always just out of reach, his name giving birth to the word tantalize. Sisyphus, who had cheated death multiple times and revealed divine secrets, was condemned to push a boulder up a hill, only to have it roll back down just as he neared the summit, forcing him to begin again, forever in an endless cycle of futile effort. Ixion, who had tried to seduce Hera, was bound to a burning wheel that spun eternally through Tartarus, his punishment as endless as his lust had been shameless. The Danaids, 50 sisters who had murdered their husbands on their wedding night, were forced to draw water with leaky vessels, trying to fill a bath that could never be filled, their punishment reflecting the futility of trying to cleanse away the stain of murder. Tydeus, who had attempted to rape Leto, was stretched out across 9 acres of land while vultures eternally ate his liver, which regenerated each night so the torment could begin anew each morning. These punishments were not arbitrary cruelty, but were carefully calibrated to reflect and amplify the nature of each sinner's crime. The Greeks believed strongly in proportional justice, and even in Tartarus, the punishment fit the offense. The ruler of this dark domain was Hades himself, stern and implacable, neither cruel nor kind, but simply just. Unlike his brothers, who constantly involved themselves in mortal affairs, Hades rarely left his kingdom. He was not worshipped widely, for mortals feared to draw his attention, but he was respected. Death comes for everyone, and Hades merely enforced that fundamental truth. His palace stood at the center of his realm, a magnificent structure of dark stone, guarded by the Furies and other spirits of vengeance. From his throne, Hades dispensed justice, ensured the orderly operation of his kingdom, and watched over the precious metals and gems that lay buried deep in the earth, earning him the title Pluto, the wealthy one. For many years, Hades ruled alone, but this changed when he abducted Persephone, daughter of Demeter and Zeus, to be his queen. The story of Persephone's abduction was one of the most famous in all Greek mythology. She had been gathering flowers in a meadow when the earth opened beneath her, and Hades emerged in his chariot, seizing her and dragging her down into his realm before she could cry out for help. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, searched frantically for her missing daughter, neglecting her duties in her grief. The earth became barren, crops failed, and famine threatened to destroy all mortal life. Zeus, finally forced to intervene, commanded Hades to return Persephone. But Hades had been clever. He had given Persephone pomegranate seeds to eat, and anyone who consumed food in the underworld was bound to that realm forever. A compromise was reached. Because Persephone had eaten only 6 seeds, she would spend 6 months of each year in the underworld with Hades as his queen, and 6 months on Earth with her mother. This explained the seasons. When Persephone was below, Demeter mourned, and the earth became barren, winter. When Persephone returned, Demeter rejoiced, and the earth bloomed, spring and summer. Persephone proved to be a capable queen of the dead, sometimes merciful, sometimes stern, but always just. She and Hades ruled together, neither particularly happy nor unhappy, simply fulfilling their roles in the cosmic order. The underworld, then, was not merely a place of darkness and despair, but a necessary part of existence, the final destination of all mortals regardless of rank or achievement. Rich and poor, king and beggar, hero and coward, all came eventually to Hades' realm. In this sense, death was the great equalizer, and Hades the ultimate democrat, treating all souls with the same impartial justice. Mortals feared the underworld, but they also accepted it as inevitable. What gave meaning to life was precisely that it ended, that death waited for everyone, and that how one lived determined where one spent eternity. This understanding shaped Greek culture profoundly, influencing everything from funeral rites to heroic codes of conduct to philosophical speculation about the nature of the soul and the meaning of existence. Heroes of legend: Perseus, Heracles, Theseus, and Jason. While the gods shaped the cosmos from Olympus and the underworld, mortal heroes walked the earth, performing deeds that would echo through the ages. These heroes were often demigods, born from the union of deity and mortal, possessing strength and capabilities beyond normal humans, but still subject to death and suffering. Their stories, their quests, their triumphs and failures became the heart of Greek mythology. The tales that inspired Greeks to strive for glory and taught them what it meant to be truly heroic. Perseus was one of the earliest great heroes, a son of Zeus who came to the mortal woman Danae in a shower of gold. Danae's father, King Acrisius of Argos, had imprisoned her in a bronze chamber because an oracle had prophesied that Danae's son would kill him. But Zeus's golden rain penetrated the chamber, and Perseus was conceived. When Acrisius discovered the child, he was terrified but unwilling to directly murder his own daughter and grandson. So he locked both Danae and the infant Perseus in a chest and cast them into the sea, hoping the gods would take the blame for their deaths. But the chest did not sink. It floated across the waves and washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, where a kind fisherman named Dictys found them and took them in. Perseus grew to manhood on Seriphos, but eventually came to the attention of King Polydectes, who lusted after Danae and saw Perseus as an obstacle. Polydectes devised a clever trap. He claimed he wanted to marry another woman and requested that all his subjects bring him horses as wedding gifts. Perseus, being poor, could offer no horse. So instead, rashly, he promised to bring Polydectes any gift he desired. The king smiled and named his price, the head of Medusa. Medusa was one of the three Gorgons, monstrous sisters who lived at the edge of the world. Where her sisters Stheno and Euryale were immortal, Medusa was mortal, though no less deadly. She had once been beautiful, a maiden with magnificent hair, but after Poseidon raped her in Athena's temple, the virgin goddess had punished the victim rather than the perpetrator, transforming Medusa's lovely locks into writhing serpents and cursing her with a gaze that turned any living thing to stone. Anyone who looked directly at Medusa became a statue, frozen forever in an expression of horror. Perseus knew he could not complete this quest alone. Fortunately, Athena and Hermes took pity on the young hero and provided him with divine equipment. Athena gave him a polished bronze shield, bright as a mirror. Hermes provided winged sandals that allowed flight, a sword of adamantine that could cut through anything, and a cap of invisibility. The Grey Sisters, three ancient women who shared a single eye among them, reluctantly told him where to find the Gorgons after he held their eye hostage until they cooperated. Flying on his winged sandals, Perseus came to the lair of the Gorgons at last. He found them sleeping, their bodies surrounded by the stone statues of previous heroes who had failed where he hoped to succeed. Using Athena's shield as a mirror, Perseus approached Medusa without looking directly at her. He could see her reflection perfectly. The serpents writhing on her head, her bronze hands and golden wings, her face that had once been beautiful but was now twisted with rage and pain. With one swift stroke, guided by the reflection in his shield, Perseus severed Medusa's head. From her neck, where divine blood mixed with mortal, sprang two beings, Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a giant with a golden sword. Both were children she had conceived by Poseidon before her transformation. Perseus quickly placed Medusa's head in a magical bag, the kibisis, that prevented anyone from seeing it. For even in death, her gaze could turn viewers to stone. Then he flew away as her sisters woke and pursued him, screaming their rage and grief. But Perseus wore Hades' helm of invisibility and escaped unseen. On his journey home, Perseus came upon a princess named Andromeda, chained to a rock by the seashore, offered as a sacrifice to a sea monster. Her mother, Queen Cassiopeia, had boasted that Andromeda was more beautiful than the Nereids, and Poseidon had sent the monster Cetus to punish this hubris. Perseus fell in love with Andromeda at first sight. He struck a bargain with her parents. If he saved her, she would become his wife. When Cetus emerged from the sea, massive and terrible, Perseus drew forth Medusa's head and held it before the monster's eyes. Cetus turned instantly to stone, a rocky island where it died. Perseus freed Andromeda, married her, and brought her back to Seriphos with him, where he used Medusa's head to turn King Polydectes and his court to stone, freeing his mother from the king's unwanted attentions. Eventually, Perseus gave Medusa's head to Athena, who placed it on her shield, the Aegis, where it would protect her in battle. As for the prophecy that Perseus would kill his grandfather, it fulfilled itself accidentally. Years later, participating in athletic games, Perseus threw a discus that struck and killed an old man in the crowd, who turned out to be Acrisius, who had been hiding there, still trying to escape his fate. If Perseus was the clever hero who won through cunning and divine assistance, Heracles, called Hercules by the Romans, was the hero of raw strength and endurance, whose labors became synonymous with impossible tasks and superhuman effort. Heracles was the son of Zeus and Alcmene, a mortal woman whom Zeus had seduced by disguising himself as her husband. From birth, Heracles possessed strength far beyond normal mortals. As an infant, he strangled two serpents that Hera, jealous of Zeus's infidelity, had sent to kill him in his cradle, grasping them in his tiny hands and crushing the life from them as easily as a normal child might squeeze a toy. But Hera's hatred would haunt Heracles throughout his life. As a young man, after marrying Megara, princess of Thebes, and fathering several children, Heracles was struck with a fit of madness sent by Hera. In his insanity, he mistook his wife and children for enemies and murdered them all. When the madness lifted and he realized what he had done, his grief was unbearable. Seeking redemption, Heracles consulted the oracle at Delphi, who directed him to serve King Eurystheus of Tiryns for 12 years, performing whatever labors the king demanded. Eurystheus, a cowardly man who feared and resented Heracles' strength, devised a series of tasks meant to be impossible, hoping each one would kill the hero. The first labor was to slay the Nemean lion, a beast with an impenetrable hide that no weapon could pierce. Heracles eventually strangled it with his bare hands and thereafter wore its pelt as armor. The second labor was to slay the Lernaean Hydra, a many-headed water serpent that regrew 2 heads for every one that was cut off. With the help of his nephew Iolaus, who cauterized each neck stump with a burning torch after Heracles severed the heads, they defeated the beast. The third labor required Heracles to capture the Ceryneian hind, a golden-horned deer sacred to Artemis, alive and unharmed. He hunted it for a full year before finally catching it without injuring it. The fourth labor was to capture the Erymanthian boar alive, a massive and dangerous creature that terrorized Mount Erymanthos. The fifth labor required Heracles to clean the Augean stables in a single day, an impossible task as these stables housed thousands of cattle and had not been cleaned in decades. Heracles accomplished it by diverting 2 rivers to flow through the stables, washing away all the filth. The sixth labor was to drive away the Stymphalian birds, man-eating birds with bronze beaks and metallic feathers they could launch like arrows. Heracles used a rattle given to him by Athena to startle them into flight, then shot them down with his arrows. The seventh labor required him to capture the Cretan bull, a magnificent beast that was rampaging across Crete. The eighth labor was to steal the mares of Diomedes, horses that fed on human flesh. Heracles tamed them by feeding them their own master. The ninth labor required him to obtain the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, a warrior tribe of women who lived on the Black Sea. The 10th labor was to steal the cattle of Geryon, a giant with 3 bodies who lived on an island at the edge of the world. The 11th labor required Heracles to steal the golden apples of the Hesperides, which grew in a garden at the world's end and were guarded by a 100-headed dragon named Ladon. The 12th and final labor, the most dangerous of all, required Heracles to descend into the underworld and bring back Cerberus, the 3-headed dog that guarded Hades' gates. Heracles wrestled the beast into submission using only his hands, brought it to Eurystheus, who hid in terror in a large jar, then returned Cerberus unharmed to the underworld. These 12 labors made Heracles the greatest hero of the Greek world, a figure of such legendary strength and perseverance that he transcended mortality itself. After his death caused by the poisoned blood of the centaur Nessus, Zeus brought him to Olympus and made him a god, granting him immortality and a place among the Olympians. There he married Hebe, goddess of youth, finally finding peace after a life of heroic struggle. Theseus was the great hero of Athens, a prince whose cleverness matched his strength. He was the son of Aegeus, king of Athens, though some stories claim Poseidon as his true father. Like many heroes, Theseus began his career by performing a series of labors, clearing the road from Troezen to Athens of bandits and monsters that plagued travelers. But Theseus's most famous deed was slaying the Minotaur, the bull-headed monster of Crete. King Minos of Crete had demanded a tribute from Athens. Every 9 years, 7 young men and 7 young women were to be sent to Crete to be fed to the Minotaur, which lived in an elaborate maze called the Labyrinth, designed by the master craftsman Daedalus so cunningly that none who entered could ever find their way out. When the time came for the third tribute, Theseus volunteered to be one of the 7 youths, determined to end the Minotaur's reign of terror. He promised his father that if he succeeded, he would change his ship's black sails to white on the return journey as a signal of victory. In Crete, Theseus met Ariadne, daughter of King Minos, who fell in love with the handsome hero. She gave him a ball of thread, instructing him to tie one end at the entrance of the labyrinth and unwind it as he ventured deeper, so he could follow it back out. Armed with this thread and his courage, Theseus entered the labyrinth, navigating its twisting passages until he found the Minotaur sleeping in the center. The battle was fierce but brief. Theseus killed the Minotaur with his bare hands, or, in some versions, with a sword provided by Ariadne, then followed the thread back to the entrance. He fled Crete with Ariadne and the other Athenian youths, but during the journey home, he abandoned Ariadne on the island of Naxos. Some say at the god's command, others say out of callousness, where she was later found and married by Dionysus. Tragically, in his haste to reach Athens, Theseus forgot to change his sails from black to white. King Aegeus, watching from a cliff for his son's return, saw the black sails and assumed Theseus had died. In his grief, he threw himself into the sea, which has borne his name, the Aegean Sea, ever since. Theseus became king of Athens and, according to myth, unified the various towns and villages of Attica into a single city-state. He was credited with establishing Athens' democratic traditions, though his personal life was tumultuous, marked by multiple marriages and adventures. Jason, leader of the Argonauts, was sent on a quest for the Golden Fleece, a ram's hide of legendary properties that hung in a grove in Colchis, guarded by a sleepless dragon. Jason had been robbed of his rightful throne by his uncle Peleus and was told he could reclaim it only if he brought back the fleece. Jason assembled a crew of heroes, the greatest warriors and adventurers in Greece. The ship they sailed was the Argo, built with Athena's guidance, and those who sailed on it were called Argonauts. Their number included Heracles, Orpheus the musician, Castor and Pollux, and dozens of other legendary figures. Their journey to Colchis was filled with adventures. They passed through the clashing rocks, two massive boulders that smashed together to crush any ship that tried to pass between them. They encountered the harpies that tormented the prophet Phineas. They faced giants and monsters at every turn. In Colchis, Jason faced King Aeetes, who agreed to give up the fleece only if Jason could complete a series of impossible tasks: yoke two fire-breathing bulls, plow a field with them, sow dragon's teeth in the furrows, and defeat the armed warriors that would spring from those teeth. Jason would have failed, but Aeetes' daughter Medea, a powerful sorceress, fell in love with him and used her magic to help him succeed. She gave him an ointment that made him invulnerable to the bull's flames, and she advised him to throw a stone among the dragon-toothed warriors, causing them to fight each other rather than him. Finally, she used her magic to put the guardian dragon to sleep, allowing Jason to take the golden fleece. Jason fled Colchis with Medea and the fleece, pursued by her father's forces. In some versions of the story, to delay their pursuers, Medea killed her own younger brother and scattered his body parts in the sea, forcing her father to stop and gather them for proper burial. They returned to Iolcus, where Jason did indeed use the fleece to reclaim his throne, but his relationship with Medea would end in tragedy. Years later, Jason abandoned her for a younger princess. Medea, furious and heartbroken, took terrible revenge. She murdered the princess with poisoned gifts, killed Jason's sons, her own children, and left him alone with his grief and betrayal, proving that a woman scorned, especially one with magical powers, was more dangerous than any monster Jason had faced on his quest. These heroes, Perseus, Heracles, Theseus, and Jason, along with dozens of others whose stories were told and retold around Greek hearths and in Greek theaters, embodied the virtues the Greeks admired: courage, cleverness, strength, perseverance. They also embodied human flaws: pride, rashness, cruelty, betrayal. Their stories taught that heroism was not about being perfect, but about striving to do great deeds despite one's flaws, about facing impossible odds, and sometimes, if fortune favored you and the gods smiled upon you, about actually succeeding against all expectation. Mantis. The Trojan War, 10 years of epic battle. Of all the conflicts in Greek mythology, none was more significant, more thoroughly documented, more enduringly influential than the Trojan War, the 10-year siege that pitted the greatest warriors of Greece against the proud city of Troy. A conflict that began with vanity and desire and ended with trickery and slaughter. A war that showed both the glory and the horror of heroic combat. The seeds of the war were planted at a divine wedding. When the sea nymph Thetis married the mortal Peleus, all the gods were invited to the celebration except one, Eris, the goddess of discord. Insulted and angry, Eris crashed the party anyway, bringing with her a golden apple inscribed with the words, "To the fairest." She tossed it among the guests and departed, leaving behind the perfect instrument of strife. Three goddesses immediately claimed the apple: Hera, queen of the gods; Athena, goddess of wisdom; and Aphrodite, goddess of beauty. None would yield to the others, and Zeus, wisely refusing to judge between them himself, appointed Paris, a prince of Troy known for his fairness and beauty, to make the decision. The three goddesses appeared before Paris on Mount Ida, each trying to bribe him. Hera offered him power, dominion over all of Europe and Asia. Athena offered him wisdom and glory in battle, promising he would be the greatest warrior who ever lived. Aphrodite offered him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta, who was already married to King Menelaus. Paris, thinking with his heart rather than his head, awarded the apple to Aphrodite. In that moment, he earned the eternal enmity of Hera and Athena, who would support the Greeks throughout the coming war, and he set in motion a chain of events that would destroy his city and his family. With Aphrodite's help, Paris traveled to Sparta as a guest of King Menelaus. While there, he fell in love with Helen, and she with him. Whether through Aphrodite's magic or genuine passion remains debated. When Menelaus left on a journey to Crete, Paris and Helen fled together, taking with them much of Menelaus's treasure. Depending on the version, Helen went willingly, swept up in passion, or Aphrodite forced her compliance, making her a victim of divine manipulation. When Menelaus returned to find his wife and his treasure gone, his rage knew no bounds. He called upon his brother Agamemnon, the most powerful king in Greece, to help him reclaim his honor. Agamemnon, seeing an opportunity to expand his own power and wealth, agreed and sent messengers to every Greek kingdom, calling upon the oath that all of Helen's former suitors had sworn, to defend whichever of them married her against anyone who might steal her away. Reluctantly or eagerly, the Greek kings gathered their forces. From every corner of the Greek world they came. Agamemnon from Mycenae, commanding the largest fleet; Menelaus from Sparta, seeking his wife; Odysseus from Ithaca, clever and resourceful, though he had tried to avoid the war by pretending to be insane; Achilles from Phthia, the greatest warrior who ever lived, along with his companion Patroclus; Ajax the Great from Salamis, massive and strong; Diomedes from Argos, young but fierce; Nestor from Pylos, oldest and wisest of them all, whose counsel would guide the expedition; and dozens of others, 1,000 ships carrying the finest warriors Greece could muster. The fleet gathered at Aulis, but the winds would not blow to carry them to Troy. A prophet revealed that Artemis was angry with Agamemnon for a past offense and demanded a sacrifice: Agamemnon's own daughter, Iphigenia. In some versions, Agamemnon actually killed his daughter, an act that would haunt him and eventually lead to his own murder by his wife Clytemnestra. In other versions, Artemis relented at the last moment and substituted a deer, spiriting Iphigenia away to serve as her priestess. Either way, the winds came, and the Greek fleet sailed for Troy. They landed on the beaches beneath the walls of Troy, and there they would remain for 10 long years, besieging the city but unable to break its defenses. Troy stood on a hill, surrounded by massive walls built by Poseidon and Apollo themselves in a previous age. The city was wealthy, powerful, and commanded by King Priam, a wise and just ruler, and his son Hector, the greatest of the Trojan warriors. The war became a stalemate. The Greeks could not take the city, but neither could the Trojans drive them away. Raids and skirmishes punctuated years of boredom and waiting. Warriors on both sides grew famous for their deeds. Achilles, invulnerable except for his heel, his mother Thetis had dipped him in the river Styx as an infant, holding him by the heel, which remained dry and thus vulnerable, cut down Trojan champions by the dozen. Hector defended his city with courage and skill, killing many Greeks, including Achilles' beloved companion, Patroclus. The heart of the Iliad, Homer's epic about the war, focuses on Achilles' rage. In the 10th year of the war, Agamemnon seized Achilles' war prize, a woman named Briseis, as compensation after being forced to return his own captive, Chryseis, to her father. Achilles, insulted beyond measure, withdrew from the fighting and sulked in his tent, refusing to help the Greeks despite their desperate pleas. Without Achilles, the Greeks began to lose ground. Hector led the Trojans in a massive counterattack that drove the Greeks back to their ships and threatened to burn the entire fleet. In desperation, Patroclus begged Achilles to let him wear Achilles' armor and lead the Myrmidons, Achilles' personal troops, into battle. Reluctantly, Achilles agreed, but he warned Patroclus not to pursue the Trojans all the way to the city walls. Patroclus drove the Trojans back, killing many, but in his excitement and the heat of battle, he ignored Achilles' warning. He pursued the Trojans to the walls of Troy, where Hector confronted him. In the ensuing duel, with Apollo's help, Hector struck down Patroclus and stripped Achilles' armor from his corpse. When Achilles learned of his friend's death, his grief and rage were terrible to behold. He reconciled with Agamemnon, accepting the return of Briseis and other gifts as compensation, but his mind was focused on only one thing: killing Hector. Thetis, knowing her son was fated to die young if he remained at Troy, begged him to reconsider, but Achilles refused to live in dishonor. She went to Hephaestus and had the divine smith forge new armor for her son, armor so magnificent and terrible that it shone like the sun and made Achilles appear more god than man. Armed with his new equipment, Achilles returned to battle like a force of nature. He cut through the Trojan ranks, painting the ground red with blood, filling the river Scamander with so many corpses that the river god himself rose up to protest. Achilles fought the river itself, and only the intervention of Hephaestus, who dried the river with his flames, saved the hero. Finally, Achilles confronted Hector outside the walls of Troy. Hector tried to run, his courage failing at the sight of death incarnate approaching him. 3 times Achilles chased him around the city walls before Athena intervened, taking the form of Hector's brother and convincing him to stand and fight. In the duel that followed, Achilles' spear found its mark, piercing Hector's throat. But Achilles' rage was not satisfied by victory. He tied Hector's corpse to his chariot and dragged it around the walls of Troy day after day, while Priam and Hecuba watched in horror from above, unable to give their son the funeral rites that would allow his soul to rest. For 12 days, Achilles abused the corpse, but the gods preserved it from decay and disfigurement. Finally, Priam, guided by Hermes, came to Achilles' tent at night and begged for his son's body. The old king's grief moved Achilles, reminding him of his own father who he would never see again. For Achilles knew his fate. If he stayed at Troy, he would die young, though he would earn eternal glory. Achilles relented, returning Hector's body to Priam and agreeing to a truce for the funeral. The Iliad ends with Hector's funeral, a moment of shared humanity between enemies, a brief pause in the violence. But the war continued. Achilles killed Penthesilea, queen of the Amazons who had come to aid Troy, and the Ethiopian king Memnon, another ally of the Trojans. Then, just as prophesied, Achilles fell. Paris, guided by Apollo, shot an arrow that struck Achilles in his one vulnerable spot, his heel. The greatest warrior of the age died from a wound that would have been minor anywhere else on his body. After Achilles' death, the Greeks despaired of ever taking Troy by force. They needed a new strategy, something clever to break the stalemate. Odysseus proposed a plan so audacious it seemed mad. They would build a massive wooden horse, hollow inside, large enough to hold warriors. They would pretend to sail away, leaving the horse as an offering to Athena. The Trojans, thinking the Greeks had finally given up, would bring the horse inside their walls as a victory trophy. The plan worked. The Greeks built the horse under the direction of the craftsman Epeius. Odysseus and a select group of warriors, including Menelaus, Diomedes, and others, hid inside. The rest of the Greek fleet sailed away, hiding behind a nearby island. The Trojans debated whether to bring the horse inside. The priest Laocoon warned them, speaking the famous words, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts." But Athena sent sea serpents to kill him and his sons, which the Trojans interpreted as a sign that the Mauls wanted them to accept the horse. Despite the warnings of the prophet Cassandra, whom Apollo had cursed so that her true prophecies would never be believed, The Trojans dragged the horse through their gates and celebrated their supposed victory with feasting and drinking. That night, when the city slept, the Greeks emerged from the horse, opened the gates, and the rest of the army, which had sailed back under cover of darkness, poured into Troy. The slaughter was terrible. The city burned. King Priam was murdered at the altar where he had sought sanctuary. Hector's infant son Astyanax was thrown from the walls to prevent him from growing up to avenge his city. The Trojan women were divided as slaves among the Greek victors. But the Greeks' victory was tainted. In their bloodlust and sacrilege, they defiled temples and murdered suppliants who had sought divine protection. This angered the gods, particularly Athena, who had supported the Greeks but could not tolerate such disrespect for sacred spaces. She convinced Poseidon to help her punish the Greek fleet. As the Greeks sailed home, they encountered terrible storms. Ships were scattered, wrecked, lost. Many heroes died who had survived 10 years of war. Those who made it home often found their kingdoms changed, their thrones usurped, their families torn apart by years of absence. Agamemnon, the great commander, was murdered by his wife Clytemnestra the day he returned, paying the price for sacrificing their daughter. Menelaus wandered for years before finally reaching Sparta with Helen. And Odysseus, whose journey home would take 10 years and provide material for another entire epic, would face trials that made the war seem simple by comparison. The Trojan War had ended, but its effects echoed through generations. It marked the end of the Age of Heroes, the last great gathering of legendary warriors fighting a legendary war. After Troy fell, the world began to change, to become more mundane, less touched by divine intervention, more recognizable as the world the Greeks of later ages knew. The war became the defining event of the mythological past, the reference point against which all other events were measured, the story that proved humans could achieve great things, but at a terrible cost. The Odyssey, Odysseus' long journey home. While other Greek heroes either died at Troy or returned home relatively quickly, Odysseus, king of Ithaca, would spend 10 years wandering the Mediterranean, encountering wonders and horrors, losing all his men, being delayed by gods and monsters, before finally reaching his kingdom and reclaiming his throne. His journey became the subject of Homer's Odyssey, an epic that transformed his name into a word for any long, difficult journey, an odyssey. When the war ended, Odysseus set sail with 12 ships and hundreds of men, expecting to reach Ithaca in a matter of weeks. But he had angered Poseidon by blinding the Cyclops Polyphemus, who was Poseidon's son, and the sea god was determined to make Odysseus suffer for that offense. Furthermore, Athena, though generally favorable to Odysseus, was temporarily distracted by her fury at the Greeks for their sacrilege during the sack of Troy. The first stop after leaving Troy was the city of Ismaros, home to the Cicones, who had been Troy's allies. Odysseus's men raided the city, taking plunder and slaves, but despite Odysseus's urging to leave immediately, they lingered to celebrate their victory. The Cicones rallied, called in reinforcements from inland, and attacked, killing several of Odysseus's men before the Greeks could escape back to their ships. From there, the fleet ran into a storm sent by Zeus, punishment for the sacrilege at Troy. The winds blew them far off course, south and west, away from Ithaca, into waters where no Greek had sailed before. They landed on an island inhabited by the Lotus Eaters, a peaceful people who consumed a flower that brought forgetfulness and contentment. Some of Odysseus's men tasted the lotus and immediately lost all desire to return home, wanting only to stay on the island, eating the flower forever. Odysseus had to drag them back to the ships by force. Next, they came to the land of the Cyclopes, a race of one-eyed giants who lived in caves and herded sheep. Odysseus, ever curious, took 12 men to explore and found a large cave filled with cheeses and pens of lambs. They waited for the cave's owner to return, hoping to receive hospitality as was the Greek custom. But the owner was Polyphemus, a massive cyclops who neither knew nor cared about human customs. Instead of welcoming the strangers, he trapped them in his cave by rolling a boulder across the entrance, then grabbed 2 of Odysseus's men and ate them raw. Odysseus realized they were trapped. He couldn't kill the Cyclops outright because then they would never move the boulder that sealed the cave entrance. So he devised a plan. He gave Polyphemus strong wine, which the Cyclops had never tasted. Polyphemus became drunk and asked Odysseus his name. "My name is Nobody," Odysseus replied. Once Polyphemus passed out from the wine, Odysseus and his remaining men took a massive stake of olive wood, sharpened its point, heated it in the fire, and drove it into the Cyclops' single eye, blinding him. Polyphemus screamed in agony, and when his fellow Cyclopes came to his cave asking what was wrong, he shouted, "Nobody is killing me! Nobody has blinded me!" His neighbors assumed he had gone mad and left him alone. The next morning, Polyphemus, now blind, rolled away the boulder to let his sheep out to pasture, feeling each one as it passed to make sure no humans escaped with them. But Odysseus and his men had tied themselves to the undersides of the largest sheep, and they escaped while Polyphemus's hands felt only wool. Once safely at sea, Odysseus's pride got the better of him. He shouted back to the island, revealing his true name and boasting of his cleverness. Polyphemus called to his father Poseidon, praying that Odysseus would lose all his men, reach home alone after many years of suffering, and find his house in chaos. Poseidon heard and granted this curse. The fleet next reached Aeolia, the floating island of Aeolus, keeper of the winds. Aeolus welcomed them and provided a gift, a bag containing all the adverse winds, leaving only the west wind free to blow them home. For 9 days they sailed, and Ithaca came within sight. But while Odysseus slept, exhausted, his men opened the bag, thinking it contained treasure. The winds burst out, blowing the ships all the way back to Aeolia. Aeolus, believing the gods must hate Odysseus to undo his help so completely, refused to assist them again. They sailed on and came to the land of the Laestrygonians, giants even larger than the Cyclopes, who practiced cannibalism. The Laestrygonians hurled boulders at the ships, sinking 11 of the 12 and eating the crews. Only Odysseus' own ship escaped. With his fleet reduced to a single vessel and his crew demoralized, Odysseus landed on Aea, home of Circe, a powerful sorceress. He sent half his men to scout, and they found Circe's palace, surrounded by tame wolves and lions that had once been men. Circe welcomed the scouts and gave them a meal laced with magic. When they ate it, she struck them with her wand and transformed them into swine. One man, Eurylochus, had stayed outside and seen what happened. He ran back to warn Odysseus, who set out to rescue his men. On the way, he encountered Hermes, who gave him a magical herb called moly that would protect him from Circe's spells. When Circe tried to transform Odysseus, the spell failed. He drew his sword and forced her to swear an oath not to harm him or his men. She turned the swine back into humans, and Odysseus became her lover, staying on Aea for a year while his men feasted and rested. When they finally decided to leave, Circe warned Odysseus that before he could reach home, he needed to consult the blind prophet Tiresias, who was dead. To reach him, Odysseus would have to journey to the entrance of the underworld at the edge of the world. Odysseus sailed to the land of the Cimmerians, a place of perpetual twilight, and performed the ritual Circe had taught him, digging a pit and pouring libations of honey, wine, milk, and blood to attract the spirits of the dead. Tiresias came and warned Odysseus of the trials ahead, particularly cautioning him about the island of Thrinacia, where the sun god Helios kept his sacred cattle. If Odysseus or his men harmed those cattle, disaster would follow. While in the underworld, Odysseus encountered many famous shades. His mother, who had died of grief waiting for his return, Agamemnon, who warned him about the dangers of returning home, Achilles, who said he would rather be a living slave than king of the dead, and many others. Returning to Aea briefly to bury one of his men who had fallen from a roof, Odysseus set sail again. Circe had warned him of the challenges he would face: the sirens, whose song lured sailors to their deaths; Scylla and Charybdis, monsters that guarded a narrow strait; and the island of Thrinacia. As they approached the sirens, Odysseus had his men plug their ears with beeswax, while he, curious to hear the famous song, had himself tied to the mast, ordering his men not to release him, no matter how much he begged. The siren's song promised knowledge of all things, and Odysseus strained at his bonds, desperate to reach them. But his men held firm, and they sailed past. Next came Scylla and Charybdis. Charybdis was a massive whirlpool that could swallow entire ships. Scylla was a six-headed monster that lived in a cliff opposite the whirlpool, reaching out to snatch sailors from ships that sailed too close. Odysseus chose to sail closer to Scylla, sacrificing 6 men to her rather than risk losing the entire ship to Charybdis. Finally, they reached Thrinacia, the island of the sun. Odysseus wanted to sail past without stopping, but his exhausted men insisted on landing to rest. They stayed for a month trapped by unfavorable winds, and their supplies ran out. Despite Odysseus's warnings, while he slept, the men slaughtered some of Helios's sacred cattle for food. The sun god, furious, demanded Zeus punish them. When they set sail again, Zeus sent a storm that destroyed the ship utterly. All of Odysseus's men drowned. He alone survived, clinging to debris, washed by the currents back toward Charybdis. He grabbed an overhanging fig tree branch and clung to it as the whirlpool swallowed his raft, then dropped back onto it when the whirlpool spat it out again. Odysseus drifted for 9 days before washing up on the island of Ogygia, home of the nymph Calypso. She fell in love with him and kept him there as her lover for 7 years, promising him immortality if he would stay with her forever. But Odysseus longed for home, for his wife Penelope, for mortal life with all its limitations and sorrows. Finally, Athena intervened, convincing Zeus to order Calypso to release Odysseus. Reluctantly, the nymph agreed, helping him build a raft to continue his journey. But Poseidon, still angry, sent a storm that wrecked this raft too. Odysseus nearly drowned before washing ashore on Scheria, home of the Phaeacians. The Phaeacians were the last obstacle before home. They were a prosperous, peaceful people, skilled sailors but isolated from the wider world. Their princess, Nausicaa, found Odysseus naked and exhausted on the beach and brought him to her father, King Alcinous. At the king's palace, Odysseus finally revealed his identity and told the story of his wanderings. The Phaeacians, moved by his tale, provided him with a ship to take him home at last. He arrived in Ithaca after 20 years away, 10 at Troy and 10 wandering. But his trials were not yet over. His palace was filled with suitors, 108 men who believed Odysseus was dead and sought to marry Penelope and claim his throne. They had been consuming his wealth for years, feasting daily in his hall, bullying his son Telemachus, and pressuring Penelope to choose one of them. Athena disguised Odysseus as an old beggar, allowing him to enter his own palace unrecognized. Only his old dog Argos recognized him, wagging his tail weakly before dying of age and joy at his master's return. Odysseus observed the suitor's arrogance and his wife's faithfulness. Penelope had resisted their demands for years, once promising to choose a suitor after she finished weaving a burial shroud for Odysseus's father, then secretly unweaving each night what she had woven during the day. Finally, Penelope announced a contest. She would marry whoever could string Odysseus's great bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads. None of the suitors could even bend the bow enough to string it. Then the beggar asked to try. Despite the suitor's mockery, he easily strung the bow, shot through the axes, then turned the weapon on the suitors. With Telemachus's help and with Athena's support, Odysseus slaughtered all 108 suitors, then hanged the 12 servant women who had been disloyal to him during his absence. He revealed himself to Penelope, who tested him by asking about their bed, which Odysseus had carved from a living olive tree still rooted in the ground, making it immovable. When he described this detail that only he and Penelope knew, she finally accepted that her husband had truly returned. Odysseus's long journey was over. He had lost all his men, suffered countless hardships, been delayed by gods and monsters, but he had survived, returned home, reclaimed his throne, and reunited with his wife. His story became the archetypal journey narrative, the model for every hero's journey that would follow in Western literature, the tale of a man who, through cunning and endurance, eventually found his way back to where he belonged. Monsters, beasts, and creatures of Greek mythology. The Greek world was populated not only by gods and heroes, but by an astonishing variety of monsters, beasts, and creatures. Some sympathetic, others terrifying, many serving as obstacles for heroes to overcome, or symbols of the chaos that civilization must constantly battle. These beings inhabited the margins of the known world, the deep places, the wild lands where human law did not reach and divine law took strange forms. Medusa, though we have mentioned her already in Perseus' story, deserves fuller consideration. Before her transformation, she was a beautiful maiden, a priestess of Athena who had taken a vow of chastity. Poseidon, desiring her, raped her in Athena's temple, defiling the sacred space. Rather than punishing Poseidon, Athena punished the victim, transforming Medusa's lovely hair into a nest of writhing serpents and cursing her with a gaze that would turn any living thing to stone. Medusa was exiled to a remote island where her sisters, the immortal Gorgons, Stheno, and Euryale, joined her. The three lived in isolation, surrounded by the stone statues of those who had sought to kill them. Medusa became a creature of horror, but also of tragedy, her appearance reflecting the injustice she had suffered. When Perseus finally killed her, her blood gave rise to both poison and healing medicine, and from her severed neck sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a giant with a golden sword. Both reminders that even from violence and suffering, beauty and wonder could emerge. The Minotaur was born from divine punishment and unnatural desire. King Minos of Crete had asked Poseidon to send him a magnificent bull to sacrifice, proving his right to rule. Poseidon sent a beautiful white bull, but Minos, enchanted by its perfection, kept it for himself and sacrificed a lesser animal instead. Enraged, Poseidon caused Minos' wife Pasiphae to fall in love with the bull. With the help of the craftsman Daedalus, who built a hollow wooden cow for her to hide in, Pasiphae coupled with the bull and conceived the Minotaur. The Minotaur had a man's body but a bull's head, and it was ferocious, uncontrollable, a shameful secret Minos wanted hidden. He commanded Daedalus to build the labyrinth, a maze so complex that the Minotaur could be contained at its center, unable to find its way out. Minos then demanded tribute from Athens, 7 youths and 7 maidens every 9 years, sent into the labyrinth to be devoured by the monster. The Minotaur lived in darkness, fed on human flesh, a creature that had never asked to be born, that was itself a victim of divine punishment visited upon Minos. When Theseus finally killed it, he ended not only the tribute but the Minotaur's own cursed existence. The Chimera was a composite monster, a creature that should not exist, made of parts that belonged to different animals. It had the body and head of a lion, with a goat's head rising from its back and a serpent for a tail. All 3 heads were fully functional, and the creature could breathe fire. It terrorized the region of Lycia until the hero Bellerophon, mounted on the winged horse Pegasus, was sent to kill it. The battle was aerial and prolonged. Bellerophon couldn't get close enough without being burned by the Chimera's flames. Finally, he came up with a plan. He attached a lump of lead to the end of his spear and thrust it into the Chimera's mouth. The monster's fiery breath melted the lead, which ran down its throat and solidified in its stomach, killing it from within. The Lernaean Hydra was a serpentine water monster with multiple heads, the exact number varying by account from 7 to 9 to dozens. It lived in the swamps of Lerna, poisoning the water and killing any who came near. Its breath was poisonous, and its blood was so toxic that even the scent could kill. Worst of all, whenever one of its heads was cut off, 2 new heads would grow in its place, making it seemingly impossible to defeat. Heracles faced the Hydra as his second labor, and he brought his nephew Iolaus to help. As Heracles cut off each head, Iolaus immediately cauterized the neck stump with a burning torch, preventing new heads from growing. One head was immortal and could not be destroyed, so Heracles buried it under a massive boulder. He then dipped his arrows in the Hydra's toxic blood, making them deadly weapons that would cause wounds that could never heal. Cerberus, the 3-headed dog that guarded the gates of the underworld, was one of the offspring of Typhon and Echidna, the father and mother of monsters. Each of Cerberus's heads could see in a different direction, ensuring nothing escaped his notice. His tail was a serpent, and snakes grew from his back and neck. His task was simple: allow all souls to enter the underworld, but allow none to leave. Capturing Cerberus alive was Heracles' 12th and final labor, the most dangerous task of all. Heracles descended into the underworld, gained Hades' permission to take Cerberus if he could subdue the beast without weapons, and then wrestled the monstrous dog into submission through sheer strength. He brought Cerberus to Eurystheus, who was so terrified he hid in a jar, then returned the dog unharmed to the underworld, proving his strength and his honor. Typhon was the most fearsome monster of all, a giant so massive his head brushed the stars, with 100 dragon heads growing from his shoulders, each breathing fire. His lower body was composed of massive serpent coils, and his arms could reach from east to west. He was born from Gaia in Tartarus, created to challenge Zeus's rule after the Olympians defeated the Titans. When Typhon emerged from the earth, the gods fled in terror, transforming themselves into animals to hide. Only Zeus stood his ground, and their battle nearly destroyed creation. Typhon's fire scorched the earth, his roar shook the heavens, and his vast coils wrapped around Zeus, crushing him. Typhon severed Zeus's sinews, leaving him helpless, and hid them in a cave guarded by the she-dragon Delphine. But Hermes and Pan stole back the sinews and restored Zeus's strength. The battle resumed, and eventually Zeus hurled Mount Etna onto Typhon, burying him beneath the mountain. Some say Typhon remains there still, and his fiery breath is the lava that sometimes erupts from the volcano. Echidna, Typhon's mate, was half woman, half serpent, beautiful above the waist, monstrous below. She dwelt in a cave and gave birth to many of Greek mythology's most famous monsters: the Chimera, the Hydra, Cerberus, the Nemean lion, the Sphinx, and others. She represented the untamed primordial aspects of nature, the mother of terrors, the source of challenges that heroes must face. The Sphinx was a creature with a woman's head, a lion's body, and wings. She terrorized Thebes, perching on a rock outside the city and asking a riddle of all who passed. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening? At noon and 3 legs in the evening, those who could not answer, she devoured. The riddle was finally solved by Oedipus, who answered man, crawling as a baby, walking upright as an adult, using a cane in old age. Upon hearing the correct answer, the Sphinx threw herself from her rock and died. The Harpies were winged women with the bodies of birds and the faces of humans, though some accounts made them uglier, more monstrous. They were agents of divine punishment, snatching away people and things the gods wanted removed. Their name meant the Snatchers, and they were filthy, foul-smelling creatures that defiled whatever they touched. They tormented the prophet Phineas, stealing and defiling his food until Jason and the Argonauts drove them away. Sirens were dangerous creatures that appeared as beautiful women, sometimes depicted with bird bodies, sometimes as fish-like mermaids in later traditions, whose enchanting songs lured sailors to their deaths. They knew all things, promised all knowledge, and their voices were irresistible. Ships would steer toward them, crash upon the rocks, and the sailors would die, entranced by the song they could not bear to leave. Only Odysseus, tied to his mast in the Argonauts, with Orpheus's music to drown out the sirens, ever escaped them. Scylla had once been a beautiful nymph whom the witch Circe transformed into a monster out of jealousy. She became a creature with 6 dog-like heads on long necks growing from her body, each head armed with triple rows of sharp teeth. She lived in a cliff on one side of a narrow strait, while the whirlpool Charybdis occupied the other side. Ships trying to avoid Charybdis would sail close to Scylla's cliff, and she would snatch 6 sailors, 1 for each head. The phrase "between Scylla and Charybdis" comes from this myth, meaning a choice between 2 equally dangerous alternatives. The Cyclopes, one-eyed giants, came in 2 varieties in Greek myth. The 3 brothers who forged Zeus's thunderbolts were ancient, primordial beings, children of Gaia and Uranus, skilled craftsmen who chose to help the Olympians. But there were also later generation Cyclopes, savage, lawless giants who knew nothing of civilization or hospitality. Polyphemus, whom Odysseus blinded, was one of these, a shepherd who lived in a cave, ate his guests, and cared nothing for the gods. These monsters served many purposes in Greek mythology. They represented the chaos that civilization must constantly fight against, the dangers that lurk beyond the borders of the known world, the challenges that proved a hero's worth. They embodied human fears, of the dark, of the wild, of death, of transformation, of the unknown. And they showed that even monsters were part of the natural order, necessary elements in the cosmic balance, not wholly evil, but serving purposes that might not be immediately apparent. Many monsters were themselves victims of divine whim or punishment. Medusa had been violated. The Minotaur had not asked to be born. Even terrible Typhon had been created by Gaia to challenge what she saw as Zeus's tyranny. Understanding this complexity, this moral ambiguity, was part of understanding the Greek worldview, which rarely painted things in simple terms of good and evil, but recognized that circumstances, fate, and the will of the gods could transform anyone or anything into something monstrous. Well, the lesser deities, nature spirits and minor gods. Beyond the Olympian gods and the famous monsters, the Greek world teemed with lesser deities, nature spirits and minor gods who inhabited every mountain, river, tree, and meadow. These beings were closer to mortals than the distant Olympians, more accessible, more present in everyday life. They could be helpful or harmful, protective or mischievous, and knowing how to approach them, how to honor them, was essential for survival and prosperity. The nymphs were perhaps the most numerous and diverse of these lesser deities. They were female nature spirits, almost always depicted as beautiful young women, eternally youthful though not always strictly immortal. Nymphs were intimately connected to specific locations or natural features, and their lives and health were often bound to the places they inhabited. Naiads were the nymphs of fresh water, springs, fountains, wells, rivers, and lakes. They presided over the sources of fresh water that made life possible, and communities would build shrines to honor the local naiad, knowing that their water supply depended on her goodwill. Some naiads had specific powers. Those who lived in healing springs could cure disease, while others could grant prophetic abilities to those who drank from their waters. They were daughters of the river gods, Potamoi, or of Oceanus, and they numbered in the thousands. Oceanids were the 3,000 daughters of the titans Oceanus and Tethys. Despite their name, they weren't primarily sea nymphs, but rather represented all forms of fresh water on earth and in the sky. Springs, clouds, rain, dew. They were nurses and nourishers, protectors of the young, both mortal and divine. Many Oceanids became consorts of gods and bore important divine children. Nereids were the 50 daughters of Nereus, the old man of the sea, and the Oceanid Doris. Unlike the Oceanids, the Nereids were true sea nymphs, living in the Mediterranean's waters, particularly in the Aegean. They were generally helpful to sailors, could calm storms, and guided ships to safety. The most famous Nereid was Thetis, mother of Achilles, and Amphitrite, who became Poseidon's wife and queen of the seas. Oreids were the nymphs of mountains, particularly associated with the mountain pine and fir trees that grew at high altitudes. They were companions of Artemis, roaming the peaks and forests, hunting with the goddess, living wild and free. The life of an Oread was bound to her mountain, and she rarely ventured far from it. They embodied the rugged, untamed nature of high places. Dryads were nymphs of trees, particularly oak trees, though the term came to be used for tree nymphs in general. Some dryads were simply associated with trees, but others, called hamadryads, had their life force completely bound to a specific tree. When that tree was born, so was the hamadryad. If the tree was cut down or died, the hamadryad died with it. This made them extremely protective of their trees, and mortals who showed respect for forests and trees would earn their favor, while those who carelessly destroyed trees would face their wrath. Meliae were the nymphs of ash trees specifically, but more importantly, they were the first race of nymphs, born from the blood of Uranus when Cronus castrated him. They were associated with honey and bees as well as ash trees, and they served as nurses to the infant Zeus, bringing him honey in his mountain cave. Alcides were nymphs of sacred groves, glens, and valleys, the keepers of special places set apart for worship or natural beauty. Lymachides were meadow nymphs watching over flowering fields and pastures, ensuring the health of the grass that fed livestock and the wildflowers that beautified the landscape. Lampades were the nymphs of the underworld, torchbearers who accompanied Hecate and Persephone through the shadowy realm of the dead. They were different from the bright, joyful nymphs of the upper world, more solemn and mysterious, but they served important functions in guiding souls and maintaining the order of the afterlife. Nymphs were desired by both gods and mortals. Their beauty was legendary, and many myths involve nymphs being pursued by amorous deities or humans. Some nymphs welcomed these advances and bore children who became heroes or minor gods. Others fled, preferring their independence. Some, like Daphne, who was pursued by Apollo, begged to be transformed into trees or other forms to escape unwanted attention. The goddess Artemis took many nymphs under her protection, allowing them to join her virgin hunting band where they would be safe from male pursuit. Satyrs were the male counterparts to nymphs, though very different in character. They had the upper bodies of men, but the legs, tails, and sometimes horns and ears of goats. Satyrs were associated with Dionysus, following the wine god in his travels, playing pipes and drums, dancing, and generally indulging in pleasure. They were lustful, hedonistic, mischievous creatures, constantly pursuing nymphs, who usually fled from them, drinking wine, and causing harmless chaos. Despite their seemingly frivolous nature, satyrs also represented the wild, untamed aspects of nature and the liberating power of letting go of social constraints. The most famous satyr was Pan, who was also a god. Pan had the legs, horns, and ears of a goat and the upper body of a man, though far more powerful and intelligent than ordinary satyrs. He was the god of shepherds, flocks, mountain wilderness, and rustic music. He played the panpipes, named for him, an instrument he invented after the nymph Syrinx, whom he loved, transformed herself into reeds to escape him. Pan took some of the reeds and fashioned them into pipes so her voice could continue to make music. Pan dwelt in the mountains of Arcadia, and travelers through wild places might hear his pipes echoing off the rocks. He could inspire sudden, irrational fear in those who entered his domain, giving rise to the word panic. Despite his sometimes frightening nature, shepherds honored Pan and sought his protection for their flocks. Sileni were similar to satyrs but older, often depicted as having horse ears and tails rather than goat features. The most famous was Silenus, who served as Dionysus's tutor and constant companion. Silenus was usually depicted as jovial and drunk, riding a donkey because he was too intoxicated to walk, yet he possessed great wisdom when sober enough to share it. The Muses were 9 goddesses, daughters of Zeus and the Titaness Mnemosyne. Memory, each presided over a different form of art or science. Calliope, the eldest and most important, was the muse of epic poetry, depicted holding a writing tablet or a scroll. Clio was the muse of history, who recorded the deeds of gods and men. Erato was the muse of lyric poetry, particularly love poetry. Euterpe was the muse of music and lyric poetry, often shown with a flute. Melpomene was the muse of tragedy, depicted with a tragic mask. Polyhymnia was the muse of sacred poetry, hymns, and religious dance. Terpsichore was the muse of dance. Thalia was the muse of comedy, shown with a comic mask. Urania was the muse of astronomy and celestial phenomena. The muses lived on Mount Helicon and inspired artists, poets, and thinkers. Invocations to the muses were traditional at the beginning of epic poems and other serious literary works, asking for divine inspiration and to tell the story well. The Fates, or Moirai, were 3 sisters who controlled destiny. Clotho spun the thread of life. Lachesis measured it, determining how long each person would live and what their allotted portion of good and bad fortune would be. And Atropos cut the thread when the time came, ending the life. Even the gods were subject to the Fates' decrees, for destiny stood above all beings, mortal and divine. The Fates were usually depicted as old women, stern and impartial, carrying out their duties without emotion or mercy. The Furies, or Erinyes, were 3 goddesses of vengeance who punished those who committed serious crimes, particularly murder of family members and breaking of oaths. Alecto, unceasing, Megaera, grudging, and Tisiphone, avenging murder, were ancient, predating even the Olympians, born from the blood of Uranus when Cronus castrated him. They were winged, with snakes for hair, carrying torches and whips, and they would pursue criminals relentlessly, driving them mad with guilt. Even if earthly justice failed, the Furies would ensure punishment, following wrongdoers to the underworld if necessary. The Horae, or Hours, were goddesses of the seasons and natural order. Originally 3 in number, representing the 3 seasons of the Greek year, spring, summer, and winter, they were daughters of Zeus and Themis. They controlled the natural progression of time, opening and closing the gates of Olympus, and they represented order, justice, and peace. Later traditions expanded their number to 12, one for each month. But in classical Greek mythology, they were three: Thalamos spring, Oxo summer, and Carpo autumn. The Charietes, or Graces, were goddesses of beauty, charm, and grace, usually three in number: Aglaia, splendor; Euphrosyne, mirth; and Thalia, abundance. They were attendants of Aphrodite and dispensed beauty and charm to both gods and mortals. They represented everything that made life worth living: joy and beauty, pleasure, art, and celebration. Hecate was a complex goddess who didn't fit neatly into categories. She was associated with magic, crossroads, ghosts, and necromancy, often depicted with three bodies or three heads, able to see in all directions. Hecate was a powerful protector, but also fearsome, controlling the liminal spaces between life and death, light and dark, known and unknown. She became especially important in the underworld cult and was honored at crossroads with offerings left at night. Asclepius was the god of medicine and healing, son of Apollo and the mortal Coronis. He learned the art of healing from the centaur Chiron and became so skilled he could raise the dead. This angered Hades, who saw his realm being depopulated, so Zeus killed Asclepius with a thunderbolt. Later, Zeus relented and placed Asclepius among the stars and raised him to godhood, where he could continue to help mortals without disrupting the natural order of death. His symbol was a staff with a serpent coiled around it, still used today as a symbol of medicine. These lesser deities made the Greek world feel alive and sacred at every level. A traveler on a mountain path might encounter an Oread. A farmer digging a well might offend a Naiad if he wasn't careful. A poet seeking inspiration would invoke the Muses. A person facing a difficult decision at a crossroads might leave an offering for Hecate. The entire natural world was populated with divine beings, making every action potentially meaningful, every place potentially holy, every moment an opportunity for encounter with the divine. This is what made Greek religion so rich and so different from modern monotheism. There was no single god to worship, no single way to approach the divine. Instead, the world was filled with powers and presences, each requiring appropriate respect, each offering different gifts, each playing a role in the vastium, complex, interconnected web of existence that the Greeks navigated daily. Conclusion. And so we come to the end of this journey through the complete story of Greek mythology. We've traveled from the very beginning, from chaos itself, through the ages of the primordial gods, the Titans and the Olympians. We've witnessed the birth of the cosmos, the wars that shaped it, the heroes who proved what mortals could achieve, the monsters they faced, and the countless spirits and deities who filled every corner of the Greek world with divine presence. These stories, born thousands of years ago on the shores of the Mediterranean, shaped not just Greek culture, but all of Western civilization. They taught the Greeks about courage and cowardice, justice and vengeance, love and hate, order and chaos. They explained the world they saw around them, gave meaning to the seasons, provided models for how to live and how to deal, and reminded them constantly that humans exist in a cosmos much larger and more complex than they can fully comprehend. The myths continue to resonate today because they speak to fundamental human experiences and questions. Why do we suffer? Why do we love? Why do we die? What makes a life meaningful? What is justice? What is the right way to deal with power? The Greeks answered these questions through stories, and the answers remain compelling even when we no longer believe in the literal existence of Zeus or Athena or Poseidon. Greek mythology was not a fixed doctrine, but a living tradition, constantly evolving, adapted by different poets and storytellers to serve different purposes, to teach different lessons, to entertain different audiences. The Greeks themselves knew multiple versions of many myths and didn't see this as a problem. The stories were true, not because they were factually accurate, but because they captured deeper truths about the human condition and the nature of existence. From the primordial darkness of chaos to the golden halls of Olympus, from the depths of Tartarus to the highest peaks of Mount Helicon, from the wine-dark seas to the green forests where nymphs danced, the Greek mythological world was vast, complex, and endlessly fascinating. It gave the Greeks a framework for understanding their world, a vocabulary for discussing the divine, and stories that would outlast their civilization by millennia. These are the tales our ancestors told around fires, the stories that inspired poets and philosophers, the myths that shaped art and literature, the narratives that helped define what it meant to be human. They are our inheritance, passed down through countless generations, and they remain as powerful and relevant today as they were when Homer first sang of Achilles' rage and Odysseus' cunning. If you enjoyed this journey through Greek mythology, please like this video, subscribe to Think While You Wink for more deep dives into ancient stories, and share this with anyone who might find these timeless tales as fascinating as you do. Until next time, sleep well, dream of heroes and busts, and remember, the old stories never truly die. They just wait to be told again.